Charlemagne will be joining us later. I am here with certain Carl Benjamin. We want to review Jordan Peterson's Conservative Manifesto, which
ruthlessly critique.
Just before we get going on this, on your based Kermit here, or whatever you want to call him.
Oh, be nice to Dr. Peterson.
Is it just me, or does Peterson have a new image here? He's kind of like, he's much more grandfatherly than he used to be here, just in his general look. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think that Jordan Peterson is a very sensitive man, and the way it was enough to give me some serious grey in my beard just to be in the position I was in, and he's like orders of magnitude higher up in the sort of attention sphere than I ever was, and so I can only imagine how stressful it's been for him, and I think he's a lot more empathetic than I am, so I think this has all been very difficult for him, to be honest. I mean, do you remember when he first came out? I keep thinking back to, there were videos when he was in a classroom and he was saying, there was this one bit where he's like, man, finally, conservatives have got something to sell to young people, like personal responsibility. Come on, man. And his message isn't very different now. It's just, it's delivered with a lot more hardness in the heart. You know, it was very touching before. And now you can see that what's happened to him has really, it's hurt him. You know,
yeah. I mean, I have to admit that I never really got into Jordan Peterson, but to me,
as well, you know,
yeah. For me though, he even like years ago, he always had the hint of the firebrand preacher in him. Like he's got that kind of touch of zeal about him. You know, it's probably why he's so popular. You know, because he's like but he is like a kind of prophet type character, whether you love him or hate him or whatever. Yeah. Which is probably why he's got such a huge following.
He does have that kind of messianic aspect to him, and that's actually long been a criticism of Peterson from people who know him, that he's always had a bit of a sort of, I don't want to say egotistical perspective, but it is hard to think of a better word. That doesn't mean he's bad, and, you know, we're all in some way egotistical, I would say, but that has been a repeated criticism, but again, it's not necessarily bad, and I think it's unfair to dismiss his influence or body of work based on something, frankly, that is quite a tepid way of addressing someone, actually. Oh, you're egotistical. Okay.
I mean, who says he's egotistical?
I can't remember the name of the person. It was someone who had been a professor in the University of Toronto with him. I can't remember. It was years ago that I read it now. But they were like, yeah, he's always been, you know, he's always had this kind of touch of messianic savior complex about him. I was like, okay. So there could be way worse things. You could be a leftist.
I mean, in fairness, though, like calling an academic egotistical is a bit like I don't know, like calling the water the sky
totally empty, you know? Totally empty allegation. It's like, okay, great, you know. And celebrities are full of themselves too. What now, you know?
Yeah.
I'm going to read to you today something I've been working on, well, for many decades, I would say, really, but more intensely and specifically in the last 4 months. I've reviewed it with a lot of people around the world. It's called a Conservative Manifesto, and it's an attempt to begin the process of outlining a positive vision for the future on the...
Positive vision, Carl.
Told you we need a positive vision. It's not that we don't need to clear them out, but you've got to have the positive vision.
It's funny. I was reading a historian called Ernst Nolte, a little bit controversial, but also not. He's like a German. He's a kind of German historian who says, you know, the mid-century Germans, like, yeah, they were bad, but they're not like the worst bad. So you can imagine why I was reading him. And
I can indeed.
But he was actually saying he had this theory of fascism, and he basically argued that fascism had no positive content, that it was almost totally, it was a movement defined by its by what it was against, you know, anti-communism, anti-liberalism, whatever it happens to be, and that was interesting. I was kind of I kind of don't agree with that either. I do think that the Germans, for example, had positive content in their whether you agree with it or not, they had some
obviously
positive content. But I just thought it reminded me of our old debate. But anyway, that's good.
Well, the thing about our old debate is that both sides are valid. You know, I do think you need to clear out the previous order, obviously, but you do need something to replace it with. So
the trouble is when people start trying to provide that positive content, I'll just say, it's like, well, you know, now we have to be Christian nationalists and follow
it's
Andrew
a lot
Torba.
easier
It's
to
like, well,
critique and tear down than it is to construct. That's the problem.
Exactly.
Center, right, and classic liberal front. I decided to entitle it a conservative manifesto. I'd played with the title, something approximating a manifesto of canonical Western virtues, but I felt that was a weaker title, and I also felt that it was time to make a statement on the metaphysical level, let's say, on the center conservative side. Conservatives are very concerned with tradition and community and responsibility, and those are...
Is that true? I feel like conservatives, as they're defined by our parties, are not concerned with tradition at all.
Well, not the Conservative Party, but like, you know, is in capital C conservatives. Of course not. They're Blairites, and I'm currently working on a based Blair podcast. No, but it's interesting, right? The conclusion, to give it a bit of a spoiler, is that Blair is no longer a Blairite, whereas the Conservative Party still are Blairites, and it's very, very interesting how he has moved beyond them, and they're still trapped in his old paradigm. Because if you go back to the 2000s, I mean, he just sounds like a modern conservative, but now he's starting to sound a lot like you, actually. You know, so Blair knows he fucked up. He knows he did this, and he knows that basically he has to go kind of hard right to undo a lot of it. And this is why I think you're getting the base Blair arc coming out now. It's all guilt. It's all guilt in his own mind. He knows he's responsible for this. On the Peterson question here, notice the tone in which he's approaching this. Right, this is a very measured, reasonable, soft tone. You know, it's the kind of tone that actually I'd like to hear more of from Jordan Peterson. I like hearing Jordan Peterson when he's in this quiet, contemplative mode. When he goes into kind of firebrand mode, he starts losing me a bit, to be honest. You know, I kind of wish he'd stay in this mode, and he's at his best when he's in this mode, and it's a shame the whole thing isn't delivered in this sort of way. Yeah,
this is grand avuncular, you know, senior Jordan Peterson as opposed to the kind of zealot. I kind of agree. I've always been turned off by the kind of zealot Peterson as well.
And it's not that he's not good or right or anything like that. It's just this is a much nicer tone. It's more appealing. It makes him personable and relatable, and it's about pathos. You know, the pathos of this is much better.
Virtues and values that have been under tremendous pressure in recent years. And so after reviewing both documents, because I wrote two versions, one on the canonical Western value side, I decided that the Conservative Manifesto title and conceptualization was stronger. Now,
can I just very quickly ask, Carl, because you've talked about the importance of labeling and words a lot in the past year. What do you think of Conservative Manifesto as a title?
I mean, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with it. There does need to be something of that nature, but I'm actually a bit bothered by the term conservative, right? I would have preferred a traditionalist manifesto or something like that, you know. I see the word conservative as it's the same as the word reactionary to me. I've conceded that the left are the important and iconic movement of the Enlightenment, and I am just riding on the coattails and being dragged along by it. In the absence of the left, there is no conservative. In the absence of the left, there is no reactionary. It's like, okay, so in the absence of the left, imagine what you would be. And unfortunately, a lot of what he talks about is framed around the left. And I find it quite frustrating, to be honest.
I was actually thinking of the Michael Oakeshott point about how reasoning from first principles and building a manifesto seems like quite a left-wing thing to do. Whereas there's something in the conservative spirit that's not written down. And this we kind of discover principles through experience. So it's a different discovery process, if that makes any sense.
We'll get into it as we go along, but like to call it a left wing, I would call it a managerial mindset. Actually, I think Burnham's. I read Burnham's pretty much all of his major works that you've been talking about. I got the audiobooks of them, and I was just listening to them on the ride into work every day and back. And I think he was way ahead of his time. Like he was a genuine visionary. In some ways with this. I mean, whoever was drawing on, all the Italian elite theorists and stuff, that because it was written quite, early in the 20th century, wasn't it?
Yeah, 1940s was most of Burnham was 40s and then 50s and 60s.
Yeah, and it's the same with Oakeshott writing Rationalism and Politics in the 60s. Like Oakeshott, again, is one of those people who's like, oh God, I can see where this is going, and this is bad, actually, and you guys don't even understand why it's so bad, and like I use the example, he's got this one line, even the most well-meaning liberal like Hayek, a plan to have no plan is still a plan, right? And so the problem is you're still trapped within the managerial mindset, and Peterson is very clearly within that mindset, and he even makes a point of saying, well, actually I don't want to instrumentalize things, but then instrumentalizes things, and it's like we're completely missing the point with any of this.
This is actually one of the real difficulties that Oswald Spengler talks about, where he says that when you've got to the point that you've deconstructed everything, not just the religion, but more. I mean, I'm reminded of that tweet that was sent out by Peter, what's his name, Boghossian or whatever. Yeah, he was asking people, what is your arguments for not letting the big boob teacher, like, what is the rational basis for not wanting this person to teach kids? And I mean, Spengler would say, like, if you have to even have an argument with shit like this, you've already you're already reaching the point where the civilization is being lost. Because it just doesn't need it doesn't need a deconstructive rational argument.
Well, I mean, it's disgusting and perverting children, and you can say,
that's
not a rational argument. No, it's not, but it is perverting children, and it is disgusting. It's totally inappropriate. And instead of appealing to a rationalistic mindset, I'm appealing to their propriety. What's proper? Is it proper? Is it traditional? No, of course not. It's disgusting. This person should probably be facing some sort of charges. This is, but it's all about how we choose to argue.
As I said, I'm trying to outline a positive vision for the future, and this is a very difficult thing to do. And this is a test case, I suppose, to see how people respond.
I haven't seen this, by the way, Carl. I would just laugh so much.
I did tell you to watch it, didn't I?
I'd laugh so much if he comes up with Trump, don't I?
No. That's the problem. It's very. I told you to watch it in advance. It is actually very complicated. I watched it a couple of times. It is complex. He is a good thinker. It's just that the paradigm he thinks within is informed by left-wing academia.
Because I would like people to respond well. I would like to outline a vision that's very enticing to people, that wouldn't require compulsion to implement, that would get people on board voluntarily. And so anyways, this is a metaphysical inquiry. And so what might that mean?
I will say that fair play to Peterson for pitching it at the metaphysical level. At the very least, I can give him that.
Yes, but okay, so I've got a deep think that I'm going to publish at some point that is called The Metaphysics of Conservatism, because I don't think conservatives properly understand their own metaphysics, and I don't think it's well articulated at all in any conservative sphere. And I don't think Peterson does a great job of articulating it either. He talks about hierarchy, but it's in the abstract, right? Reify the hierarchy. What's at the top? Well, you say, oh, God. Okay, well, brilliant. God is, if we're talking about reification, things that are real, I mean, believe what you want, but we can't exactly engage with God, right? So, if you're going to talk about hierarchy, you have to then talk about what I call stations in life, right? As in husband, father, mother, grandfather, and then you've got to start talking about the relationships between them. And these, actually have a kind of metaphysical weight. And that you have a good we describe it in all of the language you use. We talk about the quality of relationships, but the relationship is something that's in our head, right? It's about our expectations and our beliefs and our sentiments and our loves and all this sort of stuff. And it's I think it's this level we need a clear understanding. And suddenly, like, all the talk about, like, he talks about liberty and stuff like that, and I'm like, oh God, do we need more liberty? What we need is belonging. What we need is to view the world as like a tapestry of unique things in which we are a part, we're a thread in the tapestry. So what's our place? If you think like the Bayeux Tapestry, you're one thread of the Bayeux Tapestry. Like, where is your place in this grand scheme? That's how I think traditionalists should be thinking like this. Peterson's not on that wavelength, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about the markers through life, because I'm immediately reminded of the famous Shakespeare speech, "All the World a Stage" speech, because if you look at how he imagines the life of a person, all the relationships are relational. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Really, I think traditionalism, it's about a feeling of belonging. I think that's the thing that conservatives really should be offering. Like, responsibility is part of it. Taking responsibility for something is part of it, but it's the intrinsic feeling that I belong somewhere. I belong to people, and all of our language is metaphysically loaded for this, right? My girlfriend, my wife, my children. That's a statement of ownership. It's in all of our relationships, we have these statements of ownership, and so we should lean into it. Like, feel like young people can feel, oh no, I do belong here. I'm happy here. These are people who love me, and I would be taking something away from them if I left. That's what we want young people thinking. And like I said, Peterson's just not on this wavelength, which is a shame. But like, I really think that the emotional power, the persuasive emotional power is there, in that area. But maybe it's just me. I'm just going off now.
Well, let him speak a bit longer in a moment. But
how kind of
I'm reminded of the Jonathan Haidt book where, in The Righteous Mind, he talks about this, where they did this test and they asked people to fill out the sentence, I am, right? Now, in the East, in fact, in all parts of the world, apart from the West, Haidt calls it weird, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. In all the other parts of the world, people filled out I am with those relations. I am a father, I am a mother, I am a chief of a tribe, whatever it happened to be. They put in their social rank, status, or their familial relations. Whereas in the West, they tended to fill it out with things like, I am a jazz fan, I'm into football, I like Star Wars,
But I bet if you went back 100 years ago, like, your grandfather or great-grandfather would have said exactly the same.
Oh, yeah. This is a very recent phenomenon, I think.
You can think about levels of profundity. At the base, the most profound ideas are theological, for better or worse, by definition, because they deal with what's eternal and sacred. On top of that is a metaphysical foundation, and that's where philosophy lies. And then out of that emerges such things as normative communication and social policy and normative discourse. And so this is a long ways down the hierarchy towards the foundation, but it's time for a discussion of foundational principles. Part of the culture war that's raging around us is, in fact, an argument about cultural fundamentals. Well, I'm going to read this. Now, it's long and it's difficult, and I have to read it because it's pushing the limits of my cognitive ability, and I had to write it. I can't do it spontaneously. It's too complex. And so I hope you'll bear with me and you'll find it useful. I suspect it will require several listenings for people who are really committed to it, and you can choose to be committed to it or not.
I'll do it blind because I'm a world-class scholar. Carl, what do you reckon?
I don't think you should underestimate Peterson, actually. I mean, I'm not saying you're not a world-class scholar or anything, of course, but he is a smart man, and he obviously has spent a lot of time thinking about what he's putting out here.
As you see fit. So I'm going to launch into it, and it's titled, as I said, A Conservative Manifesto. That's a play a bit on the Communist Manifesto. This is a Conservative Manifesto, so I suppose one among many, and I don't imagine it'll be the last word on that front. It's not designed
just to stop a second. I did a video about this, how there is no prophet of conservatism, and that's a problem for conservatives, saying that there isn't anyone who can articulate a set of first principles to which conservatives are logically compelled to agree, and that's a problem for the conservatives and the traditionalists. This is an innate hampering mechanism for this side of politics, And it's really something we have to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, my mind, if I was to say anybody, I know people will roll their eyes, but I do think Evola's revolt against the modern world is the closest anyone has come to articulating what capital T tradition is as against the modern way of thinking. Also, René Guénon's The Reign of Quantity.
A Conservative Manifesto. Introduction. A profound crisis of meaning currently afflicts, destabilizes, and demoralizes the sovereign citizens of the West and the social institutions upon which we depend. That crisis has increasingly spread to the remainder of the world's people, generating confusion and sowing distrust, producing a counterproductive discord in place of the peaceful, voluntary cooperation and competition that could instead reign over and unite us. That crisis is, in the first place, the consequence of a corrosive doubt sowed, not least, by the careless intellect regarding the value of the principles of value, aim, and action that have heretofore inspired, guided, and stabilized us. That crisis is, in the second place...
Is it just me, Carl, or has he gone back to preacher mode? Now he's
completely. The whole thing is now, until the very end, where he then turns back into Jordan Peterson and says, okay, well, I hope you found something in that useful, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. Like, the whole thing is now preacher Jordan Peterson.
Presumably he's reading off an autocue, otherwise this is very impressive. I will just say, already, I have noted a hint of the old liberalism in here. I don't like when I was talking. I don't think at any point Guénon or Evola would talk about voluntary association as a first principle of conservatism. But anyway, let's.
Well, he later on he becomes expressly liberal, so you know.
Okay. So all I'm saying is, from the very get-go, he is hitting like notably I just don't know of any tradition that talks about voluntary association. This is the language of Adam Smith and F.A. Hayek and.
Yeah, but they're part of the English tradition. Like, if Michael Oakeshott is right about liberalism at all, it's the abstraction of English political tradition. Correct. So actually, this is our tradition, really, British sort of, political tradition.
But but now we're trying to reclassify classical liberals as our tradition.
It is the English tradition. There's no question of it. That's where it came from. This isn't someone else's. This is England's.
Well, it is a tradition.
Well, it's a part of it, right? It's a part of the tapestry. And so the problem that we actually face is actually the rationalization of it, the abstraction of it, right? The universalization of it. Certain things are appropriate in England for Englishmen, is the way we should look at it. These are not appropriate in France for Frenchmen, because look what the consequence was, So I think a lot of it actually hinges on the English ability to endure a contradiction. For the Germans can't stand this, of course, and the French think us dumb for doing it. But there's something. It was like you were saying about the trade a while ago. Like there's something in the English mind that doesn't push too hard. And push too far, and that's not normal, right? Normally, actually, the world does, but I think it's down to the sort of the viewing of oneself as a thread in a tapestry, and the tapestry being the country, the extended communities. I think it's something to do with that.
Interesting. I will mention very quickly. I haven't read the book, but I'm aware of it, which is that Kevin MacDonald, who is famous for, let's just say, another theory, which we don't need to get into. Okay. He's written a book. He's written a book about Western individualism, where he basically makes the argument, as far as I can tell, that there is something to what you're saying here. That there is these tendencies that you're talking about are kind of common to Britain and Anglo countries, but also to some extent the Nordic countries as well.
Yeah, it seems to be essentially a kind of outgrowth of the Protestant view that I don't know, but it's older in England, but it's definitely part of it.
The consequence of the historically unprecedented realization of our ignorance about the ultimate source, nature, and reality of those principles and our resultant inability to formulate and communicate a clear moral justification for their existence. That crisis is, in the third place, the consequence of the presumptuous, premature, and finally narrowly self-serving insistence arising from that doubt and ignorance, that nothing but the will to power, the willingness and desire to dominate and exploit, motivates all individual perceptions and actions and gives rise to and maintains all social institutions.
See, he's lecturing the left.
That
I'm not sure that he's right, though. I mean,
Go on.
will to power. I mean, can you ignore it? Does will to power not keep things going? It's the will of the.
But what was his statement there? His statement. He was saying that that's not the only thing. There are other considerations other than power.
There are other things, but
that's his thesis. He's not saying that will to power doesn't exist.
crisis is finally use of the frustration and resentment that necessarily arises when doubt, ignorance, and intellectual pride combine to demonize, divide, and exploit, to insist upon an impossible and final conceptual certitude, and to demand recognition of a false and unearned moral virtue.
Again, lecturing.
That crisis.
yeah, he's talking about the social justice left,
Yeah.
essentially. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he shouldn't be referencing them at all, in my opinion.
By the way, I find it much harder to concentrate on what he's saying when he's shouting in this manner.
Yes. Yeah.
Manifests itself in the idolatrous battles, simultaneously petty and terrible, that currently divide our world, in the disputes about identity that lead astray and render hopeless, in the stoking of suspicion between men and women, in the insistence that enmity must divide black, brown, and white, in the subjugation of the education that should enlighten to the ideologies that possess, in the cycle of accusation that threatens the trust upon which peace.
You see, I do have a bit of a problem with that claim as well, because he is suggesting that this is a leftist insistence that there's enmity between the different ethnicities of the world. And, you know, as a student of history and as somebody who can observe what's happening in Leicester.
There was never ethnic enmities before the Enlightenment. Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, it just seems to me that this is an incontrovertible fact about human beings, that they stay true to their ethnos. And certain writers have put it in history, they kind of naturally repel each other and they find things to fight over, just like the Hindus and the Muslims in Leicester at the moment, or any of the people that you can see fighting in American cities on any given day on Twitter. This hasn't come about because of a leftist insistence. This has come about because this is what people do.
Well, one thing I think is interesting there is actually I think a lot of it is kind of facilitated by the left, because think the Assyrians, right? The Assyrian army marches over to Judea and says, you haven't paid your taxes. And Hezekiah says, oh, that's a good point. And the Assyrians are like, right, we are literally going to destroy your cities, take your population and disperse them around the Assyrian Empire, so that now essentially the 10 of the 12 tribes, or however many it is, just disappear from history because they get broken up and absorbed into other Semitic peoples of the Middle East, right? It's not that there isn't ethnic conflict, but what there is there is a phenomenal will to power combined with temporal ability, right? And so I was saying this earlier, like the Queen's Royal Guard on their horses with their sabres, right? The ethnic conflict in Leicester could be solved in one cavalry charge. Like, it would be over. Yeah. Like, that would happen once, and they would never do it again. But it's because they don't think that's going to happen that they are essentially free to pursue their ethnic conflicts. And it's this lack of order and discipline that the left have fostered, actually, that is kind of really the problem. Because, yeah, you are right. You know, there's always been ethnic problems, blah, blah, blah. You know, everyone knows this. But the real problem is the lack of authority from the ruling power. That's the real problem.
Absolutely true. In fact, I've got a book here by I think he's dead now, but an academic called Pierre Vandenberg. It's called The Ethnic Phenomenon. And this has some phenomenal chapters on the European colonial powers, where he goes into the tactics used by the British, by the Spanish, by the various different colonial powers, and he compares and he contrasts them, and he looks at which ones were effective and which ones weren't, and so on. And the British were so good at doing this. So in fact, they were so good at doing it that they actually very seldom needed the cavalry charge that you're talking about, and they were very good at working with the existing hierarchies of a people, which is what all empires have done through history. Actually, successful ones. I was talking about the Persian Empire, the original one of Cyrus the Great. The Persian emperor was the king of kings, but he was called that because there were
sub-kings.
There were sub-kings of multiple different, ethnic and cultural groups who. He was like a kind of arbiter between them. And that's what the British did. They set themselves up above whatever the existing hierarchy was. And the people could actually go to them if they needed to, if they needed judgment on something, right?
Yeah. But there was always the threat of the cavalry charge that underpinned it. It was always, look, if you don't do as we say, you will get the cavalry charge, And did you see that the Indian and Pakistani governments both wrote to the British government saying, sort this out? They were both saying, cavalry charge them, They were like, and you see it with the Hindu and Pakistani nationalists on Twitter being like, oh, the British partition of India, it facilitated, it was your fault that there was 1 million dead or whatever when India and Pakistan split. It's like, what? It was our fault. You killed each other. Yeah, you were meant to keep us in line. That's what they're saying. That's what the Indians and Pakistanis are still saying to this day.
But there's a great contrast with what they did in 1947. Whatever you think of them, the British government still had enough about it to say, right, we're going to sort this shit out. You over there. End of.
Absolutely based.
Whereas now our governments are so abject that despite knowing that history, they actually imported those two disparate groups into the same city.
Yeah.
In our country.
Yeah.
I mean,
the thing is, modern Tony Blair would order the cavalry charge.
Oh, yeah, exactly. You see, this is the big... because Blair is that pure technocrat, he would bring he'd just be like, in jail with a lot of you, whereas none of the Tory leaders since him have been willing to do that.
I saw a speech from Tony Blair that he'd given it in 2006 or something, and his speechwriters had made him take out a line that was, and I quote, "I'm proud of the British Empire." Blair was actually quite strict, and so was Obama, to be honest.
So was Bill Clinton. This is something nobody talks about. Bill Clinton, I think, probably holds the all-time record for imprisoning black people. I mean, apart from maybe some African chieftains in West Africa in the slave days or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's carry on. But I disagree. I disagree with his basic premise, and you don't actually you don't have to quote old-fashioned racists for this. It's right there in Jonathan Haidt, where he talks about how moral tribes, right, it cannot extend beyond the group. You can't have this universalism that extends just beyond your own, and that group doesn't necessarily have to be around race, although it often is.
It could be religion, this is what we're seeing with the Muslims and the Hindus.
It could be something else, but fundamentally it doesn't extend. And the more it extends, the weaker it becomes. Even using the arguments of contemporaries of Peterson's, I'm just not sure that he's right that it's the left exacerbate the problem.
Yeah.
But it would exist with or without them, I reckon.
Yes, it would. And to be charitable to Peterson, he's not wrong that the left are deliberately exacerbating all of this. And in a conservatively run country, the first riot would have got the cavalry charge, and that would have been it. And so this just wouldn't happen. But the Conservatives have been totally disarmed by the left going, oh, that'd be racist, wouldn't it? That'd be you're a bad person because you're a racist. And it's like, no, I'm doing what the Indian and Pakistani governments demand of me, actually. But anyway.
Yeah, all governments need to be more like Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Based Martha's Vineyard, Every American state should just be now rampantly deporting exactly like Martha's Vineyard.
I saw Charlemagne, who's joining us later on in the chat last night, saying Martha's Vineyard nationalism.
Yeah. Yeah,
But, I mean, he's right.
totally.
And prosperity necessarily depends. And in the panicked, anti-human, apocalyptic doomsaying that undermines the spirit of our sons and daughters, what can those of us who attempt to abide by and manifest a courageous faith in the traditional values of our past offer in such times? Not the thoughtless and instrumental appeal to cynicism and bitterness associated with the insistence that our social and political institutions are fundamentally unreliable, corrupt, and untrustworthy. Not.
But they are.
No, that's not fair. They're
They are,
not.
though. They
No,
are.
they are not intrinsically corrupt and untrustworthy. And actually, this is actually one of the things that the British should be particularly proud of. Actually, I think is the genuine robustness and lack of corruption in the institutions before the modern day. This is what Gramsci was pointing out. It's like, well, hang on a second, the institutions of the West are not like Russia's institutions. You can't just overthrow the society. The society supports its institutions.
Okay. Yeah, but he's trying to argue that the left's insistence that these institutions are rotten, whereas I'm saying, like, from all of our point of view, the left massively control all of these institutions.
Yes.
And that's why they're corrupt.
They are captured. I agree.
I mean, this is possibly one of the big differences between what people call, quote unquote dissident right. That label is falling out of favor for various reasons at the moment. It all started by a tweet storm from Pedro Gonzalez, who basically argued that so many of our talking points are becoming mainstream that it starts becoming a nonsense to call yourself dissident. But I mean, I don't know what I think about that. But one of the chief differences, like if you take Pedro or me or Aura McIntyre or any of the people who are associated with that label, let's just say, the big difference is that we all believe, Curtis Yarvin would be another one, that all of the institutions, like you said at the event, Carl, are captured. We don't have any, and they're all controlled by our enemies.
They are
political enemies. Whereas this language from Peterson seems to, like, weirdly be defending. I mean, we'll give him a chance to let him say what he. But at the moment, it sounds like he's trying to defend the institutions as they stand now. It's surely to it.
I think that he's trying to defend what he remembers the institutions being. Again, I think you have to remember the age difference between us and Peterson, right? He does somewhat live in the boomer truth regime, and it is not wrong to say that prior to, say, the Tony Blair era, that we had good and reliable institutions, because we did. Like, I'd rather face British justice than fucking, Indian justice or something.
I mean,
like that.
there is. I tell you what, there are a few truths that we should be clear on as well.
Yeah.
I remember a book I used to talk about a lot years ago called "Why Nations Fail." I don't know if you ever read that one.
Plenty of times.
But if you remember the argument in Why Nations Fail, they talked about, like, and I've seen this in action. I've seen this, and if you travel outside of, like, Europe, you'll see this in action yourself as well. If you make a contract in Britain, there's just no question that the company is going to, like, come through, or if they don't, they'll explain why and they'll come at a later date or something like that. And
or
if
you
they
get
don't,
a refund or whatever.
or you get a refund, and if they
You're
don't,
not going to be out of pocket.
Whereas in countries like Mexico or Iran, where since the Ayatollahs took over, or in any of the African countries, pretty much, it's all under the counter, all under the table. To pay off the judge, pay off the. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in America. Obviously, it happens in America. Hello,
Ghislaine Maxwell.
Maxwell and all of that. I mean, clearly there is corruption in the system. Charlemagne, welcome, sir.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, this is a lovely reunion between the three of us. You haven't missed anything, by the way. We've only got like 7 minutes in. And did you listen to this before, like Carl did, or?
I did. It's very cringe. It's okay. Mostly nonsense, to be honest. I mean, my impression from the first 7 minutes or so is he's just telling us a bunch of metaphysical mumbo jumbo, which is just not what people are interested in right now on the right. They're really interested in practical solutions to the problems they're facing, and not all this metaphysical nonsense.
The harsh and condemnatory exhortation or demand to accept and uphold a moral code, noteworthy only for its joylessness, sterility, and tendency to forbid and damn. Instead, the confident and forthright transmission of the abandoned eternal verities to all of those who currently wander, thirst, and starve in their absence. What are the values of paramount importance to the conservative temperament currently crying out for rediscovery, reconsideration, and discussion? An inevitably incomplete but crucially necessary list might include humility, liberty, autonomy, truth, agency, identity, merit, responsibility, tradition, community, stewardship, justice.
Okay, can we pause this a second, right?
Yeah.
So look at that list, right? The left will also claim practically all of those things.
Maybe not traditional responsibility or merit.
That's not true. They will absolutely claim tradition as long as they're not white traditions. For them, merit has a different meaning, but they are still concerned about meritorious behavior and conduct. It's just about being ideologically orthodox. It's about being black enough or trans enough or whatever it is, right? They're of course concerned about justice. They want stewardship. You could describe as, say, control, representation, whatever it is. Autonomy, truth, agency, they have their own claims to those things. And identity, of course, is the crux of everything. So they are Peterson is actually not off of the page with the left, right?
Yeah, he's right. These are just sort of, even on the tradition point, I mean, the left will claim that, tradition is written in that stupid poem on the Statue of Liberty.
Or the Stonewall riots and stuff like that. They appeal to their own traditions, like the Emil Pankhurst and all this sort of bullshit. Like, they do have traditions.
I'm interested in a couple of the words that he's put there. Stewardship is quite a good word, because I feel like our governments have lost sense of that word.
Yep.
And community. I mean, I'm just trying to be as charitable as possible to Peterson here. What he's trying to get at, right? What he's trying to get at in so many words is the same topic that Evola tries to get at in Ride the Tiger, which is that the absence of these meaningful things that we see on this list here leads people into nihilism and despair. And I mean, we've seen it in the past couple of weeks, right? When the Queen died, I think the Queen died like a day before Unpopular Opinions aired. And, we were, like me and Dee and, the members of the panel, we were all very touched by it. And, we were living through this huge event in our history, the history of our lifetimes. And I mean, I found it impossible not to feel it, because it was just a reminder of what this country is.
Yeah.
And the behavior of a lot, I mean, not all of them young, but many of the people who are younger, let's just say, just had this desire to tear it down, to not allow it any purchase on them, because they're kind of almost addicted to this nihilistic mode. And I feel like Peterson, however boomer away, is trying to get at that. Would you agree?
Yes. Dare I point fingers here, but I do think that the sort of Queen of the Ashes mentality might have something to do with this. Because, I mean, it's not that the concept is wrong, of course, because she was the Queen of the Ashes. However, when focusing only on that, it seems to kind of lose the sentiment behind it, right?
What you were saying is right, though, because that is the kind of left-wing version of tradition. It's just not ours. It is essentially the nationalism of another people, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, the parochialism of another people. Like, there's nothing on this list a leftist wouldn't say, yes, I want that.
And unity. To that list, might be profitably appended a set of propositions about the true nature and source of absolute privation, the inevitability of economic inequality, and the
I can't. Sorry to interrupt. I cannot get used to his random enunciation on like why did he shout those words? I just don't get the. It's completely random which words he emphasizes and which words he shouts. If you want to take foundations of rhetoric, I talk about this, by the way.
I don't know, but he's lost the dialectic here. The fact that he's giving heed to the left's concerns about economic inequality is a losing proposition. He shouldn't be talking about this at all. He should be talking about the relationship between mothers and fathers and children or something, you know.
To be fair to Peterson, he speaks in front of people, in front of crowds, and reading from a teleprompter without anyone present is probably a little weird for him.
Maybe. I mean, you know, we all have to try. Have you ever done any teleprompter stuff, Carl?
Yeah, I do it all the time at work.
Yeah, see, Carl doesn't shout random words like that. He has a very natural.
No, but
but Peterson's taught in front of people and spoken for decades.
And I have to say, it took a long time to you've got to train yourself to be able to use a teleprompter well.
Realities of the individual competence upon which psychological integrity and social contract equally and mutually depend.
See, we shouldn't be talking about social contracts. We shouldn't be talking about inequality. All of these things are rationalistic, right? They're metric based. And they're as propositional, as Charlemagne put it. We shouldn't be talking about any of those things.
Humility is the opposite of the prideful, authoritarian arrogance that insists upon the possession of comprehensive and final skill and knowledge. To revere humility is to accept the insufficiency of current presumption, to acknowledge the value of attending to what is not yet known, to listen to, value, and attempt to truly understand the opinions of others, no matter how ill-formed, to strive to gain further knowledge, and to convince and invite instead of insisting and compelling. Humility is therefore a fundamental precondition for learning, for the revivifying, meaningful engagement that learning produces, and for the maintenance and renovation of what has already been validly learned, established, and universally valued.
I didn't disagree with anything he actually said there, though. Did you?
No, of course not, because that's eminently sensible from an adult point of view. But notice how that's not persuading a single person on the left.
What would the leftists object to anything that he just said?
Well, they would say, well, okay, fundamentally, if my subjective experience is the metric of truth, then actually that's not true, right? I don't need humility. I'm completely capable of declaring my lived existence. And so, Peterson's appealing to a paradigm that they've already rejected and spent decades undermining. And it's like, okay, that's great, but I don't think we can just go back to the previous paradigm because all of their same criticisms will apply and they're not invalid. That's the thing. They're not invalid criticisms. This is why I think the postmodern traditionalist label is actually the way to go.
I always remember the South Park episode that did like Jerry Springer, where Cartman was like, screw you guys, I'll do what I want. You go, girl. Do you remember that whole thing? Now, was that leftism on Jerry Springer? Was that the influence of leftism, or was that the kind of corrosive acid of American capitalist culture?
I don't know.
Any thoughts, anyone? Because
I'm just thinking like watch it,
like a kind of true. I'm just thinking that is the problem that he's talking about? Does it originate with the left, or is it rooted in what we talked about at the start of the stream? The reign of quantity, the fact that we live in a materialist culture that lacks any kind of higher values, any transcendence, which is ultimately what Peterson's kind of edging towards in so many words. I just wonder if the left are the source of it, or whether the source of it is, for lack of a better term, like Americanism.
I think it's rationalism entirely, because it's the Enlightenment. It is the Enlightenment.
But the thing is, right, Enlightenment, but people in, let's just pretend you went back to 1950s Britain, okay? 1950s Britain was like when we were talking about the Queen, when the Queen came to the throne in 1952, okay? It would have been unimaginable that people would have reacted the way they did to Princess Diana's funeral. Princess Diana's death in 1997, for example, that outpouring of kind of, you know, people buying like 10 Elton John CDs and wanting to be seen to cry in the streets and things like that. And I remember living through that moment in 1997, and a lot of cultural commentators, Peter Hitchens included, pointing out that this was the malign influence of Americanism on our British culture. That happened very recently, whereas the Enlightenment happened in the 18th century. By the time you get to the Victorians, that's already an Enlightenment society, but nobody in Victorian Britain was behaving like that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is going a bit off topic, I suppose, but I've got a thesis on this because I had to study logical positivism. And it seems that throughout the 20th century, there was essentially a concerted intellectual movement that was trying to scientize language to take out all of the metaphysical presuppositions that are loaded into our language that we can't actually get rid of, it seems. And that by the middle of the 20th century, that was deemed to be a failure. That actually, no, you can't have a language that doesn't have metaphysical commitments, and therefore you can never have a purely scientific language. But what this did is kind of ruined everything, because notice how, and Peterson does this as well. He says objective, right? Objective. And it's like, right, okay, well, you can spend, just 5 minutes looking into the concept of being objective. What does that mean? It means universal. It means from the perspective of the universe. It's like, what good is that to me? I'm a human being. I'm trapped in my own head. I have no idea what the universe's perspective is, and I can't imagine the universe having a single value judgment. And that's the problem, because obviously as humans, we need our value judgments. And so the Victorians, full of value judgments, but they're on the path to end up. They've science, well, that's a great thing. But one of the developments of science is going, well, hang on a second, actually, a lot of our language is totally unscientific and actually inappropriate for science. And so in the pursuit of science, of this, somehow objective, out of human body perspective, this ends up kind of ruining us and turning us into people who feel afraid of our own value judgments. And that seems to, I mean, now I'm totally open to critique on this perspective. I'm not saying I'm right, but I think there's some fruit to be born in that sort of line of inquiry. I've been thinking about this a lot.
I just struggle to see how you get from what you just described to the Hugo girl and Jerry Springer, the completely kind of self-absorbed. I mean, I'm talking about the 90s individual here, right? Which is now transformed into the abomination that we see today. But it was still there in the 90s. Like, how do you get from what you just described to that? And I will just say, other people have other answers, right? So last week we talked about, Evela's got this essay called Negrified in America, where he just says basically Americans have become infused with the history and traditions of Lizzo, essentially. So they all become quite emotional. D, I can see in the chat, is saying it's not Americanism at all, it's just the influence of women, right? But how do you get
I don't think Victorian women would have agreed with that, So I think it's something to do with this is clearly a product of the 60s, right, where culture becomes about I, and it's not, because if you you looked at the footage of London in the 20s and 30s and stuff like that, right? In the book, The English Are the Human, Dr. Renier points out that in England, it's offensive to be different, right? So everyone wears the same clothes, everyone wears the same top hat. But then you look fast forward to like the 80s and 90s, and it's actually offensive to be conformist. Like it's square. You don't want to be a conformist, and so everyone's wearing like different clothes, quote unquote, but actually it's all kind of the same. It's a very performative difference. But this, you can see, I'm not saying I know how, what the connective tissue is here, but the locus is against duty and for selfishness. It's about what do I do? And like you were saying earlier with the people in other countries, I'm a father. Well, that's an obligation to someone else, and now it's a lack of obligation entirely. It seems to be like the new man, right? The year zero.
I think it's clear that the reign of quantity progressed rather in each individual country in its own unique form for the last several hundred years, certainly predating any American influence. So I think the so-called Americanism simply comes from the fact that it's the most obvious and dominant form of individualism, but I don't think it bears the sole responsibility for what has happened. It's just the version that has come out on top.
I think it's actually kind of inevitable in America, actually, by dint of being a propositional nation.
I mean, I'm not necessarily talking about individualism per se, but a kind of gauche emotionalism that completely goes against we talk about British traditions. What about the stiff upper lip? I mean, the idea that you be, and I have seen that in my lifetime, by the way, right? So Britain is not totally gone. I was in London when the 7/7 bombing happened, and I mean, literally within a day, everybody was back to work, like nothing had happened. So you do see stuff like that, but I do also think that we've seen a creeping and then hurtling, a kind of emotionalism, because this is ultimately what this is, right? A lack of humility is basically saying, well, what my feelings are supersedes whatever anyone else has to tell me. My feelings are basically right no matter what, which is a kind of selfish pride, essentially.
But the thing, I do think it ties back to the abandonment of a civilizational metaphysics, right? Because, I mean, the concept of duty is a metaphysical concept. You've got to connect that between at least two people, or it could go a lot further, right? You've got, like, in previous eras, people viewed themselves as representatives of their civilization, right? And so if you saw, like, two Englishmen in India, they would have to act in a certain way because, England expects every man will do his duty, It's like, okay, there's a lot there that's loaded. That's such a loaded thing. And it honestly, it touches my heart whenever I think it, it's like that's a powerful line, and it's totally loaded. But now in the modern era, no one talks with these kind of metaphysics, they
do use the phrase, Carl, but they use it to sell football ticket. England expect is basically an England football team slogan now.
I didn't know that. Yeah. But that's the sort of like the capitalist remnants of it, right? But it used to be that you thought of yourself as being on a continuum. The Muslims still do. The Muslims still talk about the Ummah. They still view themselves much as bearers of civilization.
Liberty. Liberty is valuable not because it enables the hedonism that heedlessly sacrifices the future and the community to the narrowly conceptualized present and the impulsive needs and wants of the individual. Liberty is valuable because it allows all free and unique people the opportunity to best confront the potential of the future, to engage in the voluntary, productive, reciprocal interactions that make peaceful, mutually sustaining social life possible, to speak the truth that redeems and renews, and to adopt the responsibility of citizenship and ethical endeavor. Liberty enables people to think authentically and without arbitrary constraints, privately and publicly. Liberty allows people to employ that unconstrained, authentic thought to imagine a diverse set of possibilities, to singly and jointly assess, criticize, prioritize, and improve them, and to choose from those diverse, criticized, and improved possibilities the most evidently valuable, compelling path forward.
Okay.
That was just bizarre. I mean, what even is this? This Canadian is lecturing me, an American, on the value of liberty? Like, what is he even doing? Who needs to hear that?
Well, actually, I think it's worse than that, right? Like, the problem is not a lack of liberty. That's just not the problem. We are so far, and it very much in your perspective about the socialists and the libertarians, right? The socialist will offer more liberty than Peterson will offer. And so Peterson's saying, yeah, we need liberty. And the socialists will be like, yeah, because you're being oppressed by the patriarchy. Other people's expectations of you are a form of oppression. You are not free if you have to go and see your mother today. You promised that you would, and she'll be disappointed if you don't. So you're not free. You've got to go and do this. This is infringing on your liberty. And that's how the socialists defeat the libertarians every time. And so now we've atomized completely.
I will give Peter some credit here, though. I mean, I do think, I'm afraid to say, that the essay is not that well written, and it's even worse. Like, it's being delivered in a horrible style, which is distracting. But buried in there is I've got this concept of the boomer truth regime, right?
Mm-hmm.
But do you remember, it's got two sides. The ultimate evil as being the mid-century Germans. Well, ignore that part. The ultimate good being individual expression, as defined in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel that Peterson is strongly attacking that side of the boomer truth regime in this video so far. He is drawing attention, at least, to the right problem area. And this may be kind of basic stuff for all of us, but maybe he's got millions of casual followers who may just catch this, and a little bit, like, what I'm saying is a little bit of boomer truth may be undermined through this, if anybody understands what he's actually trying to say.
What part of that undermines the boomer truth, though?
Well, it's the fact that this idea of individual self-expression, no matter what the cost, is an ultimate good. And it's very clear that Peterson is against that concept of liberty. It's the kind of liberty as hedonism. This is something that even E. Michael Jones would agree with. So I just think that he is hitting like some genuinely conservative notes in this. I'm just trying to be fair to the guy. He's not.
Absolutely. But okay, so my main critique with that, and this happens in other places, is actually the reasoning behind justifying the thing. So there's one thing attacking unrestrained hedonism, right? And that's good. But what's the reason for attacking it? And well, it's actually utilitarian. It's like, well, how to maximize our productivity is essentially what he said there. And I actually really despise that framing. Like he initially said, well, against an instrumentalization of these things. It's like, yeah, but you've just instrumentalized me as my liberty as being productive. And it's like, that's not what I want. I don't think it's conservative.
Yes, Carrie, I actually agree that the second half of what he said was less strong than the first half, i.e. his solution, in fact, ironically, the positive part, it actually just sounds a bit libertarian to me, to be honest. Like,
but again, it's all very utilitarian, and that's wrong. The personal benefit and communal benefit should be emotional rather than productivity.
Autonomy. The emergent problems that constantly beset us and simultaneously offer new opportunities can only be addressed by the continual provision of equally unpredictable and variable sets of solutions. Such provision is best ensured by valuing and encouraging development of the widest possible range of productive activities and enterprises, from which variation might be drawn the most appropriate solutions. Autonomous citizens can bring the individual differences of their temperament, experience, and skill to bear on the problem of adaptation itself.
You see what I mean?
Autonomous people.
This is about utilitarianism here. This is about solving problems. This is about solutions to managerial concerns.
I mean, it sounded like he was saying that we need to maximize the division of labor.
Yes.
Like, in so many words. I mean, this is the product of a decade's thought from Jordan. It's just like, I mean, what's he been doing for the past 10 years if he's still coming up with it? Like, this is just like warmed up F.A. Hayek, essentially. He said nothing that F.A. Hayek wouldn't have agreed with, like, back in 1960 or something. So.
Yeah. But the framing is just, it's from the position of the system, right? The framing is the framing. This is what the system would say. Is that I want all of the numbers on my spreadsheet to be as productive as possible, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't care about that.
institutions, as widely distributed as possible, are free to vary in their response to the particularized demands of their local environments. From that variant pool, all individuals, free to communicate and assess, can derive the solutions most apt and efficiently matched to their current situations and problems. Widely distributed, autonomous.
It's bureaucrat speak.
It also is faintly ridiculous because one of the things I've come to know, and maybe Charlie, you'll have a bit of insight to this because you've been doing a bit more like on the ground stuff, right? I mean, people need leadership. People need to be directed. This idea that, you know, millions of sovereign individuals are somehow going to arrive at, you know, the perfect configuration through their individual choices is just not true. People need to be pushed into doing stuff. And if you leave it up to them, they, you know, they'll be the disorganized mass I talk about in the populist illusion.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening in my local community, confronting a problem right now. By a more powerful outside force. The people here have not successfully, you know, individually, they have some money and they do meet, but they have not successfully organized, which is to say collectivized around the community and have leadership that is able to them all in the interest of the community as a whole. I mean, this is just basic elite theory stuff. So what he's talking about is pretty counterproductive to the right, actually, because this sort of fine-grained individualism is gone. This era of America is over. The people who survive what is coming in the United States are not those highly autonomous and productive individuals, but the communities that are able to actually organize in their own local interests. So it should be autonomous communities, not autonomous individuals.
Yeah, but within that community, right, if the community is just a bunch of individuals, nothing will ever happen. You need someone to take the reins, and then people will do stuff. But until you get
tribal
that organizing,
elders.
Yeah, you need, exactly, Carl. And I just find it like, I mean, maybe he'll get onto this later in the video, but I find it vaguely shocking that Peterson spent, like, you know, the past decade studying, and he's still like coming up with this stuff. It's like, where's he been?
But also, like, I would attack the core premise. I mean, what's the difference between liberty and autonomy? Really? Like, what's the difference? Right. But secondly, the only autonomous people are those people who wash up on desert islands. No one's autonomous. That's a total fiction. It's so easy for the left to turn around and pick this apart that I don't even know why we would begin with this as a premise. No one's autonomous. Of course we're not autonomous. I don't want to be autonomous. Like, god damn, that's the worst thing. That's exile. That's what that is in previous eras. This is why I keep coming back to the Wanderer. That's an autonomous person. Sad, alone, afraid, cold, hungry. That's an autonomous person. No, a person is not autonomous. They might be free, you know, as in they're free to choose how to live their lives and within certain restrictions, blah, blah, blah. But that's just not something we need to even worry about. Like, we've always had that. It's a default presupposition. We don't need to talk about it. You know, we're not going to have the Soviet Union in England. That's not going to happen, you know? And so we don't need to think about that. What we need to think about is, like, why we are together, you know, what we like about these places, things like that.
Do you get the impression that he's trying to sell us kind of like warmed over Thatcherism here? That's what it's really sounding like so far.
A little bit, yes.
Local activities allow for the establishment of resilient, large-scale, unified systems, optimally resistant to the rapid and dangerous spread of any given unpredictable emergent problem, optimally able to respond with timely and particularized solutions. The principle of autonomy, therefore, enables abundant provision in relation to the necessities and luxuries of life, maximal choice regarding the manner in which that provision will occur, and diverse opportunities for meaningful, sustaining engagement in the voluntary, productive, and sustainable
I'm sorry, what was the point? What was the point of Peterson doing this? Just to re-articulate fucking boomer conservatism again? Like, what is the point of this?
It is Hayek, right? That's and don't get me wrong, love Hayek, completely agree. If we're going to have our entire lives managed, I'd rather Hayek be put in charge, right? Totally agree. That would be ideal. But actually, maybe having our lives managed is not a good idea. And, like, again, all I'm hearing is the position of the manager. That's it.
Yeah, he's just wrong. I mean, people do not function well as these autonomous units given maximal choice. They'll pretty often make bad choices because people just don't know what they're doing. If you're fully autonomous like the Exile, 99% of people are just going to die in that situation. They need leadership.
Look at San Francisco.
Yeah,
what he's saying exactly what I was thinking,
Carl.
Exactly what I was thinking, San Francisco. Yeah.
The Taliban were right about drug addicts. You got to take them off the streets and clean them up.
Private and social endeavors that best produce abundance and choice. Free markets best fulfill the need for economy, local.
It is warmed over Thatcherism. You are right.
Activity, and why?
You see, it's not even just that though. It's actually recognizing the situation we find ourselves in 2022 as well.
Yeah.
Don't forget, which is so much of the stuff that we all take for granted in these sorts of spheres now. But it's just like he's still talking like. I mean, it's literally, this could be like a William F. Buckley speech from 1975.
Like he's basically on the cusp of saying there's no such thing as society. We need maximal autonomy and freedom and free markets. It's oh god.
Wide distribution. Their superiority to all other known and likely possible systems, given that fulfillment, should be unapologetically recognized and promoted by those.
It's all. I'm sorry to do this, but it's just not true. It's just not true. In our lifetimes, China, right, has gone from being a backwater. I mean, okay, yes, Chinese civilization was not a backwater, but relatively speaking to the West. Even in the 90s, you could look at pictures of China and still see like chickens running around, and they were wearing their little Chinese hats and all of that.
Go to Cornwall and see that. I live in Cornwall. You can still see chickens running around.
You understand what I'm saying, though, right?
Yeah.
China has gone from being relative to the West, it was kind of nowhere, to being the second, if not the biggest economy in the world, an emerging superpower. It didn't do that through free markets, I'm afraid. It did it through like a really
we could argue that it did, though, right? Because it was essentially preying on American free marketeering.
Yeah, that's right.
And like, because this whole like Thatcherite position, like with the same with Reagan, we didn't have half of London owned by Russian oligarchs until Thatcher. I'm totally with Scruton on this one. It's actually the free market is useful as long as it's useful, and it's not useful when it hurts you.
Yeah, it's certainly hurting my community at the moment, where there's basically a private business sale that is happening and the community doesn't want it to happen, and they're powerless to prevent free enterprise, right? And it's funny because you can see the tension in the people where they believe in private property and free enterprise, but at the same time don't believe that the transaction would happen. It's pretty interesting, but yeah, free markets have a place, and then in other places they can harm you.
All right, let me just put it a different way, right? If you were to say, what is China closer to? Full-on 19th century laissez-faire free market stuff as championed by Ludwig von Mises, or a managerial regime as described by James Burnham. It's obviously the second. It's obviously not a free market. It's a managed, heavily managed and regulated market, state-backed and state-directed. I mean, there isn't really even, communists, let's not forget it's meant to be a communist country, but communists would say that the way to define a socialist nation is who has ownership of the means of production. Well, in China, they've worked out this system where, well, we'll allow you to have a factory, mate. We'll allow you to run a company and to get rich, but at any moment, the Chinese Communist Party can come in and seize the land, seize the company from you.
It's fascist economics.
And what I'm saying is, objectively speaking, that has, regardless of what other weaknesses it's got, on the metrics of these people, on the metrics of Peterson and Thatcher and everybody else, it has objectively done really well in our current global market.
But that's only because of the neoliberal paradigm that facilitates it, right? in any other, if America wasn't underwriting the economic global order, would it have done so well? Probably not, I think.
Right, but I mean, you
'Cause, I
could
mean,
say
any ruler in like the 12th century, they would have said, right, okay, so we want to outsource all of, say, Milan's chainmail engineering to a foreign country. They'd be like, no, we're just going to forbid it.
yeah. So what I'm saying is, what you're saying is, it's been facilitated by the West engaging in free trade as opposed to protectionism, right? So that weakens the argument even further that quote unquote free markets are the best, because you've literally created a superpower across the other side of the world.
And I don't disagree. The question is, what are they the best at, right? They are fantastic at generating wealth, if that's the question, but they have downsides, and we should be honest and open about those.
Those dedicated to the canonical value.
I should say, by the way, that it is also if you read this book I mentioned, The Ethnic Phenomenon, it's also a myth that, let's say, the British Empire was built on free trade. It wasn't.
No, it was mercantilist, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but at a certain point, they reduced all their tariffs and embarked on quote unquote free trade. But he argues that, well, because they were the global hegemon,
Yeah.
every new market they opened up was actually it's not just trade. It's like a chain of control. It's like a rope of control.
Yeah.
So now the British are in your market. They de facto control and America has taken over that role today. So it's
I was going to say it's exactly what the Americans have done.
So free trade works only if you're a global hegemon as a tool of control.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Values of the West. No other systems allow for the crucial and ever-changing decisions about what is currently valuable to be made by the uncompelled choice and voluntary endeavor of the widest possible number of people. No other systems allow for the sampling and aggregation of the myriad of widely varying and particularized thoughts and decisions constituted by that free choice.
You see, all I could hear when he was talking there was mass immigration. That's all I could think about.
All I can hear is him arguing against online communists on Twitter.
But the logical endpoint of what he just said, the free choices of millions of people aggregating their choices, you end up with Leicester.
Yeah,
but
kind of.
Right?
Well, no,
I mean, the idea that people are making free choices in their purchases is ridiculous anyway. I mean, most people's decisions on what they watch, what they buy, it's set by Netflix and Amazon algorithms.
Yeah, I tell you what. I mean, not to get too bogged down in economics, but one of the more shocking discoveries that it's not really a discovery because I think we all know it deep down is basically every product that you can think of that you buy in the supermarket is maintained just by people's habitual habits, right?
Yeah.
So you buy Fairy Liquid without even thinking. This can of Coke Zero, I bought it because I'm just used to going up to a counter and saying, "Oh, can I get a Coke Zero?" Or can I I don't even think about it because it's an ingrained habit. And a huge number of people's consumer choices aren't choices; they're just kind of what they do week to week out of habit. And they know that, the managerial regime knows that. I've got this account on there's a website called Statistica I have an account on there, and you can literally go in there and type in any brand in Britain or America, and you'll see that every market is the same. The market leader has 70%, which is basically those guaranteed sales week on week on week, and you can look at any of those markets over time, right? So, I mean, I'll just pick Fairy Liquid for one because it's an automatic one, right? I want to buy some washing up liquid. Okay, I'll pick up Fairy Liquid. In America, you've probably got another detergent brand that you guys use, but you have a look at their sales, and you can literally see about 30 million people buy that, guaranteed every single year. That's it. I mean, that's Fairy Liquid going back to 1905 or whatever. So it's not in what respect are these genuine choices is what I'm saying. It's just that's really predictable information. It's if you're Unilever or Procter & Gamble or somebody like this, you're not really having it's just I know the size of the market. This many people exist in the country. This many people will need washing up liquid. therefore I've got guaranteed income year on year on year. And they don't really have to worry about competitor.
I suppose it's more about the concept that it could have been otherwise, right? Because I think he's just basically arguing with Twitter communists here, saying we're not having a socialist planned economy, blah, blah, blah. Because just having like one brand of car is a retarding factor to a civilization, right? And so that's just what it seems to me that he's arguing here.
And voluntary endeavor. No other system, therefore, does or apparently can operate in the manner that makes continued adaptation to the unpredictable horizon of the future both possible and desirable.
So one thing that he talks about there is like the future crises we're going to experience, and I'm very much put in mind of Oakeshott. And again, this is entirely like managerial rationalistic thinking where the system just lurches from crisis to crisis. And like, I don't care about the crisis either, unless, you know, it's something imminent and dangerous. That's not how we should be. That shouldn't be an organizing principle. Avoiding crises actually is a bad organizing principle because it gives a remarkable amount of power to people who actually can't see the future. So, you know, but are tasked with the job of trying to prevent the future. And so it's like, yeah, that's actually not good. And Oakeshott was right about that as well, in my opinion.
The future genuinely and unpredictably differs from the past. In consequence, a continual array of complex and unforeseen problems present themselves before us, demanding redress. A diverse, honest, and freely exchanged range of thoughts pertaining to those problems is the eternal precondition for the possibility of solution itself, as well as for its dissemination. There are many valid, productive, and attractive ways of looking at and acting in the world, and a variety of perspectives is simultaneously necessary, strategically appropriate, and inevitable. It is also forever the case, however, that disciplined striving in a single direction fortifies and unifies, that an ethic capable of uniting diverse citizens in trust and peace is necessary and desirable, and that truth itself is never to be finally found in a particular set of facts or body of knowledge. The genuine striving forward ethically, instead, is the very embodiment of truth, and therefore the most valid manifestation of truth itself. The humble attempt to advance ourselves and others through discourse as a consequence of listening and spontaneous response is, instead, the very embodiment of truth. The willingness to reach in good faith.
I haven't got a fucking clue what he's talking about, Carl. What's he saying?
Okay, so, you know, at the beginning, this is a strange way for him to frame this, because he begins talking about unity and striving together as a unified body. That's what identity is. That's fundamentally, and the Queen's funeral showed that, right? We all did something in a unified manner because we actually realized, you know, so why this is separate to the identity section, I don't know. But the thing is, like, philosophically, the concept of truth is actually really up in the air. There are lots of different definitions and interpretations of what truth is. I personally think that Tarski was the closest, where it's just that which represents reality. You know, a truthful statement is one that represents reality. But there are other theories, like that which on which opinion is destined to converge, which I dislike for many reasons I won't go to now. But like, everyone wants truth. The question is what truth is, and what has he given us here? Like, he's given us. Can we rewind it like 2 minutes or so, just so we can have his exact words?
My understanding is that he's giving us the kind of the classic kind of science truth that, you know, we're always discovering new stuff and the truth is never final.
Diverse, honest, and freely exchanged range of thoughts pertaining to those problems is the eternal precondition for the possibility of solution itself, as well as for its dissemination. There are many valid, productive, and attractive ways of looking at and acting in the world, and a variety of perspectives is simultaneously necessary, strategically appropriate, and inevitable.
Right.
It is also forever the case,
right. Stop,
however.
Stop for a second, right? So in that, he has given us the convergence theory of truth. What he's saying is, when enough people come together, they will all converge on what appears to be the appropriate truth, right? Well, historically, that's actually not true. And like you have Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions, in which he talks about actually there's an orthodoxy, because these things are like this. Peterson's presenting a very idealistic view of what a drive towards truth is. Actually, what happens is a massive institution builds up around the orthodoxy. A series of people start building up on the fringes who have something true, and then is a kind of like tidal wave overthrows the orthodoxy. And this is how you get like the Newtonian revolution of, the various other, the Einsteinian versions, blah, 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 right? And so like truth isn't just a bunch of people sitting around abstractly and disconnectedly discussing what is and is not reality. And at the end of the day, I don't really agree on the correspondence view of truth, because on the concordance view of truth, because it like something is true even if no one agrees to it, right?
Yeah,
that's just the fact of the matter, and we might not have any idea what's actually true. Like, and this is what all these string theories are getting at and stuff like this. So what he's doing here, he's trying to establish that, and he's framing it wrong. We have a right to have our opinions, and we have a right to be wrong. I have a right to have a mistaken opinion. Like, you don't have a right to destroy me because I was a lockdown skeptic or whatever, like they're doing to Toby Young right now. Even if Toby Young's wrong about everything, and this is what Jordan Peterson's trying to frame, but it's framed in the wrong manner. And it's just, I'm finding it frustrating.
Yeah, I'm also reminded of something that Ed Dutton talks about. I mean, again, you can take or leave Ed Dutton, but one of the things that he has constantly drawn attention to is actually breakthroughs and inventions and innovations almost never come about due to this convergence that Peterson's talking about.
No.
They come about due to antisocial autists, essentially. People who are kind of like poorly socialized and are able to actually offend the orthodoxy that you're describing. And that's really how things move forward. And it's ironic that Peterson has this view, because Peterson himself is a kind of slightly autistic, disagreeable man.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Give Peterson his due. He's right about social justice and all these things. And he's found himself on the outside of academia, where he was very much in the center because of his unorthodox views. He is replicating Kuhn's precise formula for how these revolutions take place. So concordance theory I just don't like. I correspondence theory, a statement is true if it represents reality. That's it. End of story. And he's not wrong about having lots of people giving their statement. And this is, again, one of the things that the left has already got him on. It's like, look, there's no objective way of figuring out reality because we are subjectively trapped within our own heads, right? The postmodernists, the left, are totally on board with this. And so Peterson could be arguing inside their framework, saying, look, it's because we don't have access to a universal truth that we can say, well, actually, it is my truth, and each person's truth is actually a sort of a facet, a spotlight into what is actually there. And that validates every perspective. And that way the left have to kind of go like, yeah, okay, I guess you do have your own truth, just like I have my truth. And actually, what right do I have to take that away?
I just want to say as well, by the way, I have something which I like to call the dwarf fortress theory of Western civilization, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with dwarf fortress.
I'm aware of it.
It's been it's a really, really super autistic game made by one developer called Toady. He's been at it for 16 years, like a one man. I think it's 1 or 2 man project. Okay.
Yeah.
And literally it's like snail's pace development. Like he'll spend a year getting tiny, some library system to work or whatever. It's really complicated. I love it. It has been enormously influential in the world of simulation and strategy games. You've probably played games like RimWorld or Prison Architect. What I'm saying is that Dwarf Fortress did not come about through committee. It came about due to the almost psychopathic obsession of one man. And it seems to me that the obsessive psycho, if you want to put it that way, or like it's poorly socialized single lone individual, almost always male, is actually really what drives the things that Peterson's trying to talk about. So it's ironic, actually. In this one area, there is the scope for individualism, but individualism isn't millions of people having, making their own individual decisions in the aggregate. It is what Bronze Age Purvitt calls a few exceptional men. Does that make sense? This is a very different, kind of more aristocratic notion of what the individual is, right? It's not everybody. It's
the same in any field, anywhere. Like your philosophy, in science, in music, in anything. You get the one guy who revolutionizes music, and now everyone is copying that style of music, right? Like, it's in everything. Like the one genius who sees the stars align and figures out something, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and I think, just to mention Thomas Carlyle a second, who originated so-called great man theory, I think there's a reason that we're all basically taught to laugh at that in school. So kind of like if people are taught about it at all, but I always remember it being like really dismissed as almost like a childish notion of history or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think there's a reason that our kind of our system, our managerial regime has done that, because it despises the exceptional individual. But it's just like, well, when was the last time a AAA studio produced anything as innovative as Dwarf Fortress? It just doesn't happen, because you cannot make anything great through committee. That's just a fact.
On Epochs, which is our history series on Lotus Eaters, we're constantly drawn back. We're dragged into the great man of history theory because it just seems to manifest itself over and over and over.
Of all the billions of women with computers, not one of them has even come close to producing Dwarf Fortress. In fact, they haven't even produced one fucking game as far as I can see. I tell you, they do produce games. But they tend to be interactive manga novels. They tend to be written by women on Steam.
Yeah.
If you ever find those. But, yeah.
I just like the idea that like the female race is now like shamed. Not one Dwarf Fortress, ladies. This was the metric.
I tell you what, I've gotten some terrible arguments with my wife about that, but it's still true. It's still true. I mean, anyway, let's carry on.
I don't know. I just picture you having this blazing round. You're standing in the doorway. Well, where's your Dwarf Fortress? Bam!
It is also forever the case, however, that disciplined striving in a single direction fortifies and unifies. That an ethic capable of uniting diverse citizens in trust and peace is necessary and desirable, and that truth itself is never to be finally found in a particular set of facts or body of knowledge. The genuine striving forward ethically, instead, is the very embodiment of truth, and therefore the most valid manifestation of truth itself. The humble attempt to advance ourselves and others through discourse as a consequence of listening and spontaneous response is, instead, the very embodiment of truth. The willingness to reach in good faith across the divides of race, sex, economic class, and political temperament is, instead, the very embodiment of truth.
I just don't understand what he's talking about. He's saying that the embodiment of truth is when you have diverse people come together, united under some formula. That's a definition of truth. That doesn't even make any sense.
But this is.
I don't actually understand what he's saying.
As far as I can tell, he's describing convergence theory. Like, so truth is a product of many people all essentially eventually arriving at a certain point, I think.
Let me just steal man him a second. I mean, it's just like, well, Isaac Newton watches the apple fall. He says it's gravity. It's not like any other forces happening. Black man, Chinaman, and Red Indian all agree with him, and therefore it's the truth. Something like this.
Yes. But then surely, like, the Earth is flat, or, like the sun revolves around the Earth, right?
But you see,
it's the one guy who doesn't agree that actually has the truth in that situation.
You see, one of the things that I've been mulling with, and I still don't know where I stand on this, because you find it in writers like Vico and Spengler and people like that, is this idea that actually each individual civilization has its own truth forms, right? Now, this sounds very strange, but I'm drawn back to Lizzo's "I twerk because I'm a black woman" kind of idea. It's like, well, that is her truth. Can't really take it away from her. But it's like it can never be mine. As a white man, I'm never going to be twerking, ever. Not even for a joke.
For the sake of argument, we'll concede that you're white, but like, I think what I think what Peterson's getting at here is descriptions of reality, right? Because Lizzo twerking is really saying this is how I feel, right? That's not really, who cares? Basically, she can feel any way she wants, and I've got no reason to doubt that's how she feels. But like, I'm sure that Peterson is trying to talk about a description of reality here, rather than how one feels about themselves or their culture or whatever.
But does it?
Because he's trying to edge out the social justice warriors who'll censor you for having a wrong opinion about gender.
I wonder though whether you can ever truly disaggregate those two things that we've been talking about. Which is to say, like, maybe the leftists do have a point about, can the African ever accept the white man's science and all that sort of stuff? It's like, well, maybe there's a reason they're so resistant to it, because it's like it's come from Western forms, if you want to put it that way. It's come from, in Spengler's terms, Faustian man, a Faustian mindset, and like Chinese science is going to manifest itself in a different way and find like weird Chinese truths in it as opposed to Western ones. No?
Sure, but I think that Peterson is right that there is like some objective reality, right? It's just our access to it is questionable. But there are going to be things that we all happen to agree on, like, I assume atomic theory hasn't been debunked. I'm not a scientist, so I never read any of this stuff. But like, if the structure of the universe is made up of atoms and void, well then we are all going to end up finding that when we go looking for it, right?
I don't know. I feel like only like again, to use Spengler's terms, only like Faustian Western man would go looking for it. Maybe the voodoo man is happy just to do his voodoo,
Well, yeah, but that's yeah, sure. But like, the Chinese are currently occupied by a rationalist Enlightenment philosophy, right? So, like, anyone can adopt a philosophy. It's whether the predilection towards it. Like, obviously, you need a certain number of conditions in place, say. But but no, I don't think that it's that simple, frankly.
Insistence on the absolute relativity of truth can be combated not least with the realization that truth is a process, not a state. The realization, finally, that the adventure of life,
that's a big and contested claim,
is to be found precisely in pursuit of the truth, constitutes the only real antidote to the corrosive nihilism that justifies deception, hopelessness, cynicism, and abdication of responsibility. The most fundamental freedoms upon which...
Again, like, you talk about nihilism, it's like, look, it's the pursuit of quote unquote the truth that's destroyed the Bible. All of the myths that bound everything together and prevented nihilism have been destroyed by the pursuit of the truth. So it's like, was it a good thing? I don't know.
Virtuous states and polities depend, freedom of speech and thought foremost above them, exist not for the impulsive gratification of momentary pleasures, but so that the truth that redeems can find its living expression.
What does that mean? That's like some weird
agency.
The truth redeems. I mean, to me, it's God who redeems, not the truth, like some big capital T metaphysical entity. I mean, Vox Day had a whole book about this, basically criticizing Peterson's religion, but he's just putting forth this weird form of deism centered around this capital T truth that's going to offer you some sort of redemption through the process.
How does God differ from the concept of truth? Serious question, because like I was always under the impression that religious people essentially synchronize the two concepts, right?
Yes, but okay, so he described truth is a state, I would say,
no,
not a process. He described
according to him, it's a process.
But the truth as defined by Christianity would be some absolute state that is already determined, and
right.
It's not something that you sort of figure out. It's all
laid out there for you, and it may require some interpretation of scripture, but it's not hidden from you, as Peterson is sort of suggesting.
I mean, in the perennialist tradition of Evola, who isn't specifically Christian, he just looks across all the religions, they use the term the absolute to describe, and Carlyle uses that word occasionally as well, to describe this same concept of God, or it's not, being, whatever you want to put it. It's the absolute, and it's unmovable, and that is the truth, which is a immovable state, right? In contrast with this process that Peterson is describing.
So are we talking about like if our language was sufficiently complex, a form of sort of permanent reality we could describe?
Yes, in Plato's cave, right? It's the Platonic world of forms as opposed to the shadows on the cave, if I want to put it that way. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but the world of forms is obvious bollocks.
I mean, the other big thing he's missing here, just in terms of the comparison with truth and God. I mean, God has many other dimensions as well, namely moral ones. Peterson's basically just saying that the truth is the highest good, period, which is not what God is.
But how would you differentiate God from truth?
Truth is within God, but truth alone doesn't holistically describe what God is. God passes judgment, for example, which truth, as just this sort of objective state of matter, I guess you could say, doesn't do that.
Okay, so we've had liberty, autonomy, and now we've got agency. Can't wait to see what he's going to say here.
Well, what's the difference?
The insistence that we are all most appropriately conceptualized at the level of the group, whether by sexual preference, race, gender, political belief, or ethnicity, provides the counter opportunity for conservatives to reestablish and reinforce the bedrock notion and principle of the sovereignty of the individual, which attributes to each person the capacity to advance and progress in the face of uncertainty, malevolence, and adversity. Those with truly canonical Western views can as well oppose the demoralizing notions of the essential corruption of all human activity and its putative basis in nothing but oppression and compulsion, with the knowledge that the desire to strive forward is in its essential form a manifestation of the spirit of voluntary cooperation, the desire for productive, reciprocal social interaction, and the reality of genuine goodwill. The ambition that overcomes privation and penury, the urge to adventure toward greatness, the desire to marry, the wish to have a family, the willingness to shoulder responsibility, all this is truly and genuinely admirable and worthy of recognition and reward. All this constitutes the basis of any truly stable and desirable state, psychological and social alike, with attendant duties voluntarily undertaken and attendant rewards validly earned and distributed. All this is, furthermore, the most reliable basis for any true sustainability.
I mean, if I was a leftist, if I was either a leftist watching this, or if any of our, nationalist friends watch this, they'd say, Jordan, why are you trying to erase my identity? Why are you trying to erase the things that, make my people special? You're trying to erase this with this kind of notion of the individual all the time. I feel like he's repeated this point 3 times already.
Because very Western centric.
Yeah, I mean, it's specific to the West, but he's trying to universalize it to everybody, which is what the left-wing critique would be. It'd be like, well, this is Eurocentric. Lizzo wants to twerk, basically.
But moreover, how would Jordan object to Lizzo twerking?
He couldn't.
She's just living her freest and best, most self-actualized life.
How could he account for the fact of her individual choice to twerk is a destruction of our culture? Because, our people don't twerk, for example.
It's and not just that. There's something debauching about it, right? It's lowering a state of sanctity that a woman has before she starts waving her ass around. Like, there is a metaphysical construct around a woman before she debauches herself that he's not speaking about. Purity. This is a conservative concept.
I just think his complete denial of groups is really quite disturbing and not true to the human experience in any way.
Well, yeah.
Or to use his phrase, if I was objectively looking at human history like a scientist, I'd say you cannot ignore these factors, Jordan, because, it is objectively, it is the truth, that we have discovered through the process of thousands of years of human history, that this is just not going to work, mate. And it's not conservative. It's not conservative either.
Yeah,
this idea of it.
Another way of framing it as well is that, well, any amount of individualism and the appeals to individualism he's making are identical to universalist appeals, and we know that people are different, and it's okay that they're different. Cultures are different, Not even to talk about like the physical, biological differences between like men and women and blah blah blah. Eskimos and people living in sub-Saharan Africa and stuff like that. When it comes to like, subcutaneous fat deposits and stuff like this, right? When we talk about cultural values and things like that, these are not universal. They're parochial to times and places and peoples and cultures. And so going, the individual. This is a Western preoccupation, and that's the postmodern critique. It's like, this is your view, and it's like, and things, if Jordan Peterson just owned it and said, yeah, this is Western conservatism, that's it, deal with it, then he would be free and home free, right? Because he could just say, yeah, get fucked foreigners, this is ours and we're not going to give it up. But he's not doing that. He's making a claim to speak about all mankind in all places and all times.
But you see, I think his project is fundamental. I mean, I hate to sound like such a leftist, but it is a colonial project, basically, to try to impose this way of thinking on the Lizzos and the Hindus and the Muslims and the Chinese and all the other people in the world who just don't think like this. They just don't think like this.
And
they
like
won't.
I said, if he had kept it to this is the Western canon and the Western tradition, okay, it's not for the foreigners. Got it.
Identity.
Oh, here we go.
A sophisticated and adaptive identity is in no wise established through the mere insistence that a felt sense of subjective feeling must dominate and prevail. Identity is instead...
Stop. Oh, God, Jordan, what? No.
I actually had trouble processing that sentence, although I disagreed with it.
Your identity is how you feel.
Let's see him say it again. Hold on.
A sophisticated and adaptive identity is in no wise established through the mere insistence that a felt sense of subjective feeling must dominate and prevail.
Yeah, I mean he just stated the leftist definition of identity.
Well, no, what he's trying to do is he's trying to cut off the leftist demand that I am a man, I am a woman, I'm transgender, my pronouns are this and that, and therefore you are obligated because I feel it sufficiently powerfully, right? He's trying to cut that off, saying, well, no, look, and he'll go on to say that actually identity is a series of negotiations. And it's like, yes, but it is feeling, basically, right? That is also what it is. Like how you feel is, at least in some aspects, core to your identity. And so saying it's not that, it's like, okay, but it is, and that's just one aspect of it. It's a complex phenomenon.
I mean, I'm just thinking back to our conversation, Carl, about the Queen's funeral and this past 10 days that we've all lived through. And I always remember a speech Bowden gave where he talked about the need to step beyond the mind. He was defending rhetoric basically, but it's there's something much more powerful about those things beyond the mind. And again, is he trying to take that away from us? Because that is essentially an identity. It says, well, yes, this is this country and you belong to these traditions, and that makes you feel something, and that's good because that's what brings people together. But he's even trying to deny that.
I think that might be a little bit uncharitable to go that far, but I think, again, too much of this is framed around what the left will interpret rather than what the self-generative principles of conservatism would be, right? And it's like, look, I just ignore the left. Just ignore the left and tell us from your heart what you think being a conservative is, and then the points of contradiction will become self-evident.
Yeah, that might be the best thing that's been said the entire stream. What he's doing is just trying to construct conservatism in the space around leftism so that people don't react a certain way to this, and that's just not how you go about defining what an oppositional ideology is. You don't define it in the spaces left over by your opposition.
Yeah, because your opposition then dominates you a priori, right? They've already won the argument because you can't frame yourself away from them. This is why I hate conservative and reactionary as titles.
Identity is instead the result of continual and iterated communication, cooperation, and competition between parents and children, husbands and wives, friends, colleagues, subordinates, superiors, and the present and future selves of sovereign individuals. Identity is, therefore, and must remain, a carefully and justly negotiated agreement between the individual and society at every level of that society. Conservatives can therefore offer a revitalized...
So he's not wrong that a component of identity is that, right? That is true, and probably especially from like the psychologist's position, but that's not the sum total of it. And it seems that this is, again, kind of an instrumental or proceduralist view of the thing. It's hard to describe, like Lizzie's funeral. Again, like I just keep coming back to that and being like, actually, I don't need to negotiate that with anyone, right?
That's Queen Elizabeth, not Lizzo's funeral. Queen Elizabeth.
Queen Elizabeth's funeral. Yeah. I don't need to negotiate that with anyone. And in fact, I'm not interested in negotiating that with anyone. Actually, weirdly, I felt it kind of spiritually, to be honest. And I don't, that's why I kind of shed a tear, right? Even though I don't personally have ever cared about Queen Elizabeth in any way, shape or form, to be honest. It was the ceremony of the thing, and it was the fact that it was speaking to my identity as a Brit. And these things are a negotiation. That's the procedure, but not the starting point or the consequence.
I just don't understand why you can't just admit bigger units than the individual. It's just like, well, it's like, why are all these relationships just on these atomized units? Why can't he just admit there are groups, there are nations, there are governments, and all of these things feed into your sense of who you are?
Because he's still within the rationalist Enlightenment framework, which ultimately will end with communists atomizing everything, because the idea, the entire point of the Enlightenment is the sovereignty of the will, right? If I want to choose something, I should be free at all times to choose that thing, and that's not realistic, frankly. It's not how human beings work, and it's destructive to all of those things that we hold as public goods. So he's still trapped within essentially the framework that the left will beat him in.
The idea of identity as a negotiation is just wholly incomplete. Doesn't make any sense in some respects. We can just say biology. I mean, there are certain aspects of biology that aren't a societal negotiation. There's no one to negotiate with. Well, it's simply absolute.
I don't think that's necessarily true, right? So, like, for example, for the sake of argument, AA is a white man in this conversation, right? That's a negotiation that we're having. Whether I see him as a man is another negotiation. Now we're going to have to go fight about it. No. And Peterson, he's right on that. Underneath every male interaction is the ultimate threat of force, right? And so that's true, right? That's a form of negotiation. So it's not that Peterson's not seeing something true, it's what he's seeing here is incomplete.
Well, it depends. Your interpretation of what a man or a white man is one thing, but the fact of maleness is quite another.
That's totally true. Man being a social construct, obviously.
Citizenship as the most meaningful and significant form of identity. The sovereign citizenship that makes each person a credit to themselves, a reliable partner in marriage, a caring, judicious, and discriminating parent, a trustworthy and competent partner in enterprise, an active participant in local and distal civic institutions, and an informed, enlightened, and ethical political actor and voter. This is all predicated upon conceptualizing and articulating the need for a shift in the Western individual's moral outlook, away from the narrowly hedonistic blandishments of endless rights and externally bestowed privileges, and toward the constructive rewards attendant upon a mature sacrifice, duty, responsibility, and reciprocity.
Okay, so let's stop there, right? So he's not wrong, because what he's laid out there, the purpose and most meaning is derived from attachments, right? Look at what he laid out there: to get married, to be responsible, to have people rely on you, right? These are all attachments. So your identity and your meaning is subjective and contingent on your station in life, where you are, who relies on you, who loves you, who you care about, blah, blah, blah. He is right, but he's articulating in a really odd way.
I mean, I will just come back to the point I made earlier about the need for leadership. Most people, as we have observed in the past 2 years, are natural peasants and they are natural followers. Therefore, in order to be any of the things that Jordan Peterson was talking about, they basically need to be guided. They need
They'll
to
never be
be
those things.
pushed. Well, they might be with the correct governance, if you want to put it that way, with the correct wise counsel. And if they won't do it, then they should be made to by somebody wise.
Peterson also basically described the most fundamental group unit there, the family. He described all the aspects of it, but he fell short of actually acknowledging that group unit exists.
Yeah, that he didn't put the metaphysical construct over it, right? He's talking about the individuals that make them up, but doesn't connect them with the thing that we all have in our heads.
Merit.
Merit! He really does shout, doesn't he?
Individuals vary widely in their abilities across the entire range of human endeavor. A small number of highly productive people operating within all domains of human creative endeavor account for most of the production and progress. A direct relationship therefore obtains between the recognition and promotion of excellence and the ability for societies to ameliorate absolute privation, to generate and disseminate creative solutions to new and unexpected problems, to provide opportunity for individual and social flourishing and advancement, and to justly and effectively reward those endeavoring to be productive, successful, and generous. The tight causal connection between merit and consequence means that pure merit can be defined objectively by the ability to undertake the work and build the social networks associated with goals valued by the free choice of actors in the free marketplaces of friendship, community association, consumer choice.
Fucking hell, he's like a full-on Randian. This
Well,
isn't just like...
he also at the beginning he basically stated what you did earlier, is that it's not all the masses of individuals that matter, but just these elite, highly influential people who make huge advances in their field. And he's asserting that this meritocracy or merit is the way to get that, but maybe there's another way to get that.
The free marketplace of friendship. I mean, what the fuck? I mean, is it a free marketplace? Most of my friends are guys I went to school with. I didn't have fucking any choice in the matter. It's just like the people, the people around you, your neighbors. It's, I don't even like most people. I'm just not convinced that there's a free market in any of these. It's like, am I wrong? I mean, in a way, our friendships online are a bit more free market than the ones that we have in real life.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really know what to say to that. It's just not how companies work. I mean, he seems to act like merit functions in this totally transparent way where everyone can just sort of see and notice all the merit happening, and people promote each other and get hired, etc., based on merit. I mean, in my corporate experience, most of the way you move around and then the friends you make is kind of just based on who you know, and to some extent it's based on merit, but not really. I haven't found that merit is really the primary driver of sort of what people you end up associating with. It's a factor, but it's not really primary. I mean, it's also hard to measure. How do you even measure the merit? I find that's actually quite difficult as well. I mean, if you've ever interviewed people, for example, figuring out how competent someone is actually quite difficult, and people have sort of different types of competencies. as well, and it's not easy to measure.
Well, here are my grades from university, and here's my personal statement saying I have a burning passion for computer programming or whatever it is.
Employment opportunity and political decision. Such merit has been validly, however partially and imperfectly, and must remain the fundamental principle governing selection, placement, and advancement in our social institutions. Responsibility. Every individual requires a purpose.
I mean, just to go back a little bit on that point, because this is almost unquestioned that, people should be selected on their merit, and discrimination on the basis of race is inherently wrong, right?
I would say people should be selected for loyalty primarily.
But I'm just thinking, like, the Western civilization that Jordan Peterson is defending here, which, don't get me wrong, ascended to greatness, was exclusionary for most of its existence. Like, it deliberately did not select, it was not an open competition to all. It didn't take from everybody. Most of the leadership positions were excluded women, they excluded people of color, they selected for white men, and that seemed to be good enough. So I'm just kind of putting a counterfactual there, that I just wonder if this kind of, and in many cases, in the British case, most of the working class were excluded too. For most of the existence of the empire, it was aristocrats. So most of the population was actually excluded from the possibility of these roles, and yet they still achieved amazing things. I'm just putting that counterfactual out there. Now it's been opened up to everybody. I don't necessarily see the results as being like tremendously better or anything. In many ways, they've been worse.
I'm not sure I even agree with the concept of meritocracy even existing anymore, to be honest. Just to lay it out quickly, like, everything has a standard for whether it is meritorious or not. The most legitimate in line to the throne because of his bloodline, or like, take Biden's, the one who replaced the ginger woman. She's a black trans immigrant lesbian. Great qualifications if you're a progressive. Like, you've got your standards. It's not a straight white man. That's not merit in this paradigm. And every paradigm has a standard of merit, and like, it's just they differ.
To offset the tragedy of life. Every person needs something of true value to set against the anxiety, frustration, disappointment, grief, and pain of mortal existence. That purpose is not to be found in the cynicism that too easily replaces an initial naivety, or in a short-sighted, narrow, and reactive hedonism, but in the establishment of the stable, reliable, truthful, and productive intimate relationships, friendships, apprenticeships, civic bonds, political duties, philosophical commitments, and religious habits and practices. In the absence of the structure and direction produced by such bonds and activities, the tragedy of life looms unacceptably large. Individuals subjected to suffering in the absence of an orientation towards meaning and responsibility become cynical, unstable, hopeless, and alienated. Then, resentful, vengeful, and dangerous. Conservatives can offer personal responsibility, the committed social bonds of marriage, family, and job, and true civic engagement as valid and reliable antidotes to the nihilism of
one of the issues I have with this, right, is that his conception of merit is so applying for a job and getting a job. It's just like, well,
it's utilitarian.
I'm sorry to bring it back to Evola, but when Evola talks about something approaching merit, he's talking about mastery and excellence and aristocratic, but like, the ability to become a master fencer or something like this, right? This is a very different conception of what merit means to this. It's a very small, dare I say it, petty bourgeois notion of what merit means.
Well, he's on responsibility now.
Oh, sorry, we've moved on from
Yeah.
merit, but he still
You
didn't
could
talk
swap
about
the word
that.
responsibility for what you just said. And
But he
it's a
still
different
didn't
thing.
talk about that, right? He didn't even talk about self-actualization,
Well,
which I actually thought Peterson would talk about. But
what he talked about is just sort of you're going to get meaning by just sort of inhabiting these forms. It just sort of hopping on the treadmill of your habits, and that's going to give you meaning, and that's what conservatives offer. I don't know, that's really weird. He actually mentioned religious habits in there as if like the habit itself is what gives meaning. I mean, I don't even know how that's related to responsibility exactly. Maybe he'll tie it all together, but really the religious belief should have been primary in all of this framing, and not just some sort of sidelined idea of religious habit. I know people who are married and have kind of done all the things he's talked about, and that doesn't give them meaning. I mean, just sort of procedurally following the patterns of behavior that your society has long performed. I mean, it's definitely important in achieving a sort of transcendent meaning in your life, but it's it's just very utilitarian. I mean, it's just the procedures alone are not enough, and I've seen that personally in people.
I'm just interested how many people watching this show work in an office job, for example. Are you getting okay? Presumably there was some meritocracy involved in the selection process for you getting that job, but does it fulfill you? Does it do any of these things that Peterson said? Because I mean, this is one of the really weird things about boomer conservatism is that it's like getting a job is like the be all and end all. But it's just like for most people, a job is a pain in the ass. Even the Austrians recognized this when they said that. What is it? Labor is disutility, right? People prefer leisure time to labor time. It's like most people, if they had the choice, wouldn't even be in that job. They're just doing it because they need money or whatever. I'm not saying that people cannot self-actualize through mastery of something, but that's very different from working for some corporation. I mean, in a strange way, I don't want to kind of do that Marxist thing of venerating the artisan, right? But in a strange way, I feel like do you remember when I used to talk about 1381 John Smith and the master blacksmith of the medieval times, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that dude, that blacksmith. Okay, he was at his anvil hammering all day or whatever. But I reckon he probably would have got a greater feeling of self-actualization from his job than 99% of corporate jobs today.
The Marxists aren't wrong in their descriptions. They're wrong in their prescriptions, right? They are right that it would be better to be a master artisan working, producing one piece of magnificent work that a knight or a king or whatever will buy for 20,000 francs or something, which is your entire year's wage, than it is to be a guy on a fucking construction line, who produces 10,000 things a day but gets 100 francs a month or whatever. They're definitely right about that.
Cynicism, the temptation of narrow short-term pleasure, and the demoralizing consequences of faithless hopelessness. Such advocates can remind us all that sacrifice, the willingness to forestall the gratifications of the immediate moment, the willingness to engage in difficult endeavors in the present to build something worthwhile for the future, the moral obligation to withstand the trials of immediate, timely disagreement and conflict to ensure a lasting peace, is a laudable, necessary, and ultimately redeeming activity. Such advocates can finally define a pathway through the pitfalls of guilt, offering atonement through responsibility as the proper response to the inevitably unequal distribution of talents and privileges.
There is a hint of a kind of Protestant note through this. I'm kind of reminded of Calvin or something during that whole spiel about responsibility. It's like, find your calling, and you'll come to God or something.
But he's addressing the communists, so it's like
community. The West has rightly emphasized the value of the individual, drawing on traditions derived from Rome, Athens, and Jerusalem. The admirably liberal West has properly and usefully articulated a doctrine of individual rights grounded in natural law in consequence, and that has led to an era of freedom unparalleled in its productivity, generosity, and universality. But
Great.
the highest ideal to which an individual might aspire cannot be grounded in an atomistic.
By the way, I did notice he snuck Jerusalem into the left there, into the west there.
Yeah, I don't want to like rub your PPs too much, but I would just say the reason for the unparalleled prosperity is just the British Empire, and not this concept of natural law coming from Jerusalem or whatever.
Yeah, like
So
what happened in the the 1,000 years in between, because
So
it was still
what-
the same. It was still the same precepts behind the civilization, but yet they weren't producing all the things that we have now.
Well, I find this interesting. 'Cause like you said, he just said Rome, Athens, and Jerusalem, right?
Rome, Athens, Jerusalem. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he knows Nietzsche. I know he knows Nietzsche. He cites Nietzsche all the time. And in Nietzsche's view, Rome and Jerusalem are polar opposites and don't
Yeah.
agree in any way, shape, or form. The great spiritual battle of the world is Rome versus Jerusalem, in his view. So it's just like, no one would say the Romans view the individual as the highest unit of good either. That is actually what Nietzsche would call Jerusalem, Judea, right? That is true. That's the view of the oppressed, right? Because the oppressor doesn't care about the people he's oppressing. I'm the one with the power. I don't care about that. That's the slave's call. And so, okay, you have to kind of abandon the Rome aspect to include that. And the Athenians as well. Again, I don't agree. The Athenians were a fucking slave state. They were very much in the Roman mold when it came to their ethics. So it's just like, these are opposites. It's Rome versus Judea, and he's putting them together when I know he knows better than that, which is just weird.
People really interested in this. This was even a distinction even before liberalism. I remember when I was working on my Shakespeare morality book, when I was working on the Renaissance and the Reformation, what were those? There's a really good essay somewhere, I can't remember the author's name, called The Two Faces of Humanism. And the tension is right there in Shakespeare. He's always going back to Rome all the time. But also there's the
Christian.
There's the Jerusalem part of it as well.
Yeah.
And their intention, even in Shakespeare. And in the Renaissance, there's two different routes to get into the Renaissance. One through the rediscovery of the classics and the kind of neoclassicism, I guess, of the period, where they were really into reading Seneca again and things like that.
Yeah.
They got into the Stoics again and things. But then at the same time, you get the Reformation, which is basically what we recognize today as like Christian fundamentalism. Like, let's wipe Christianity clean of all of these heathen influences that have snuck in through
the Catholic Church,
through the Catholic Church, and through people like Plato and Aristotle and Aquinas. If you read Aquinas, he's always quoting Aristotle. Well, Calvin, quite rightly, he was like, well, the fuck has this got to do with Christianity? It's just like, if it's not in the Bible, don't count.
Yeah,
basically, right?
Yeah.
And so you have these two things happening at exactly the same time. It's really interesting, but they're obviously in tension, and their intention. I tell you, I've got a bit in that book where I talk about the master morality that Nietzsche talks about is present in Machiavelli. Would you agree with that? You can see it in Machiavelli's Prince and
completely,
and in the discourses, right? He's talking about will to power. He's talking about all those sorts of things. But at the same time, you have the Calvinists who produce, if you want to think about it, the almost perfect worker for the capitalist system. The almost perfect factory worker or farmhand or something is somebody who follows that doctrine of the Protestant work ethic. And these two things are in tension. And I'm not saying that the tension is bad, because they produce all sorts of interesting things, but they're both there at the same time.
Individualism, or predicated on the assumption that the highest manifestation of human striving be akin to an isolated self-actualization. Conservatives can rightly insist the highest must serve the lowest, communally, in the truly religious sense, can rightly observe that we find our very sanity in relationship to community. Conservatives can note that sanity itself, both personal and social, is something continually and inescapably negotiated. That there can simply not be the happiness or the pursuit thereof at the individual level in the absence of the optimally functioning social surround. A purely individual ethos is shallow, unsustainable, unworthy, and fragile. What do we do when our happiness vanishes?
Hang on. The thing is, he's been talking about liberty and autonomy this whole time. Like,
Yeah.
That's a contradiction, Jordan.
Yeah, this does seem to push up against all the earlier stuff you were saying.
A purely individual
It's
ethos
not that I disagree either.
fails to provide the orientation crucial for the upward striving that constitutes hope, the integrity necessary to resist temptation, the antidote to the dangerous and narcissistic expansion of ego and presumption, or the bounds of love that support us through tribulation, trial, and tragedy. Stewardship. Those who uphold the conservative ethos can offer responsible stewardship as the appropriate response to the necessity of maintaining harmony in our relationship with the natural world upon which our lives ultimately depend. This is an extension of the proper canonical response to the treasures of the historical past. That which is valuable should be recognized, valued, maintained, guarded, and passed on down the generational chain. The scope of human activities has expanded in recent decades to a scale that makes of those activities a genuine planetary force. This presents us with real dangers as well as unparalleled opportunities. Panicked, apocalyptic thinking in relation to the former demoralizes, invites a careless...
How is this turned into like he's backdoor talking about like climate change and stuff like that?
Yeah, I noticed that as well.
But
just
like,
because it's because of what we talked about earlier with the way he's framing this thing. I mean, this whole point is apparently just framed around dealing with the natural world.
I would have thought stewardship. He is taking it to mean something like preservation or conservation, both of the natural world, and I presume he means of like cultural heritage and like museums and art stuff and statues and things like that. But which we would all agree with. But like I would have thought stewardship also includes guiding people to make the correct choices, which is what we were talking earlier on. But it seems like leadership has no.
If you notice in his previous bit about community, what he tied it back to is the happiness of the individual. I mean, all this community stuff, he's basically bringing it in because he's saying ultimately the individual is going to be able to seek their happiness more in a system like this. He's basically still putting happiness as the highest goal. And of course, he uses the slur hedonism to talk about the types of happiness he doesn't like, although I'm not really sure where he gets that, because basically what he's doing is he just seems to prefer, well, he doesn't like short time preference. He wants long time preference behavior. But why? He's basically just saying, I want you to achieve happiness in the long term rather than the short term. So it's this thread that keeps repeating itself, this long term planning, but for what? Just for happiness? That doesn't really, happiness is not the conservative ideal of what your life is for.
So I think that it's going to be very difficult to sell a philosophy to anyone that doesn't promise some sort of happiness, right?
Absolutely. I mean, even like Christianity promises that, right? The ultimate reward is
bliss in heaven. Yeah. And so I don't think he's wrong to propose that, but I think that he should use a different word, something like satisfaction, right? So it intrinsically means over time, and it can, because happiness can very easily be folded into pleasure, and it becomes, again, it sounds kind of utilitarian to me. Frankly.
Why doesn't he just say eudaimonia, the Aristotelian kind of fulfillment?
Maybe people wouldn't know what that means.
Well, he could define it. He's used lots of other fucking incomprehensible words in this lecture so far, so so it's not like he's being particularly easy to understand. So, and anyway,
fair point. No, fair point. But yeah, human flourishing would be a good.
Yeah, flourishing. That's a much better word. Flourishing.
Yeah. And so basically, we've arrived back at Aristotle, who was right all along.
I'm also not convinced, by the way, that marriage is a path to happiness.
Oh,
all right, let's go.
Better hope your wife's not listening, mate.
Oh, there's no chance. Absolutely no chance. All right,
clip it and send it to her.
And self-serving demonization and derogation. and justifies the kind of impulsive, incautious, reactive, global response that can easily produce unforeseen problems of the same magnitude or greater than the original problem.
Just say what you mean. You
Thoughtful stewards of the natural world,
Nobody's talking
governed
right there.
by the doctrines intrinsic to the Western canon.
Just as a quick pause, right? I mean, he is right. Like when Mao declared war on the starlings, like he didn't expect a famine to come of it, right? Yeah, true. That's completely true. You have control over something, but you don't have control of the consequences of that thing. And so you should be prudent and cautious about the things that you change, because actually you're limited in scope because you're just a human being. You don't realize what the consequences are going to be. Great point. You could have said it much more clearly, like you were saying.
Oh, how much longer is this going for? It's been dire, fucking dire. You weren't kidding. I thought it was going to be a lot better than this, but this has just been...
I did tell you to watch it in advance, didn't I?
Can, as an alternative, recognize the particulars of the problems characterizing the relationship between our industrial culture and the natural world. Can confidently note the fact that the human ingenuity most effectively manifested in free societies has and might endlessly and ever more efficiently continue to ameliorate poverty and rectify excessive inequality. Can encourage conceptualization of the human population and its constituent individuals as a net good in the planetary context. Can deliver to young people, first and foremost, the message that people of faith, courage, and goodwill can manage the very real problems that confront us and make the future not the apocalypse that is always threatening, but the eternally productive and abundant garden that we may all tend and inhabit. Justice.
That was mental, that section, I'll just say.
He's just talking for the climate lobby, isn't he?
It's just fucking mental.
Yeah,
Just
that whole
ignore the
segment
climate
was just
lobby.
for the climate lobby.
Someone talking about stewardship would surely be invoking Scruton. Surely.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you're not up for the climate change stuff, which I'm sure most people here aren't, the idea that it's just an eternally abundant garden is also fucking not true either. It's just like, well, there is such a thing as finite resources. So,
Well,
I mean, what's the point of saying that? It's just not true.
It kind of is, though, right? A well-managed plot of land is going to produce crops forever, right? That's what he's getting at.
If it is correctly tilled and manured, not if
Yeah.
it's overfarmed, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what, correctly stewarded. We're not going to. I don't see a problem with that, really. You could argue the case, and when he says forever, I mean forever being relative to however long we expect to live or whatever.
Every individual who strives upward in the optimal and socially beneficial manner deserves and must be granted the benefits attendant upon the consequences of that striving. This is the judicious and discerning recognition, rewarding, and reinforcement of productive and generous ability. This is
Wait,
the
if you
justice
don't,
that fosters
if you don't
and
behave that way, you don't deserve justice. Is that what he's saying?
Yeah. Oh my God. This is so heavily contestable by the left, in fact, that good luck persuading them.
I just don't even know why he's using the word productivity in a spiel about justice.
Well, yeah, it's I don't know. Is he a communist? Maybe if you're not. What is going on here?
Are you part of the managerial elite, AA? No, I can see you're not. You don't care about the GDP. The line's going up, AA, okay?
It's just irrelevant to the concept of justice, like completely.
Yes.
maintains that productive generosity at the individual and the social level. This is the justice that applies discriminating attention to the endeavors and utterances of past and present and enables constant separation of wheat from chaff.
Yeah, but hang on. Okay.
This.
Okay. There is no chaff in the left-wing mindset, right? The worst criminal on earth is as valuable as the most noble and self-sacrificing hero, right? They do not recognize the difference between virtue and vice, and it is a product of the view of Judea that he folded into the Roman view. Like, every individual has innate value, and the left cannot believe that agency can change that. That's what this is all about. That's why they always side with the criminal.
I have come to believe that Jordan Peterson is a full-on Ayn Rand psychopath, basically. That's what all I'm getting from this stream is that that he is like he's close to being, what do they call it, an objectivist or something. This is
a lot
madness.
of this does sound. I was going to mention.
I
it earlier,
recall,
actually.
I might just be making this up, but I recall maybe a year or so ago, I'm pretty sure he put out a call to talk to libertarians or something like that, which I thought was odd, but it was kind of when Peterson was on the down low. I don't know if anyone remembers that. I might just be making that up. I'm pretty sure he started talking to some libertarians not that long ago.
I don't
No,
recall
it's-
offhand.
And
I'm
not the
saying
Mises
wrong.
people.
This is the most mental definition of justice I've ever heard.
He began pretty strongly, right? Justice is a man each getting what they deserve, right? That's essentially what he said, just in much more flowery language, which I agree with, because that's, of course, a very commonsensical definition of justice. If you deserve something, it is right that you should have that thing, right? But that's just not what the people he's obviously trying to talk to and persuade around to his position believe. They don't believe that. They can't conceive of it, and they will call him someone who is ignorant of power structures and the corrupting effect of society, blah, 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 the Rousseau position, basically. They'll slap him with that and dismiss everything he has to say from this point onwards.
Yeah, people in the chat are confirming what I was saying. He said Bob Murphy, so that's a Mises guy, but someone also mentioned Michael Malice, who is a total lunatic.
Oh, Michael's fun.
He's funny. He is a lunatic.
Is the justice that has in the past and must continue to be in the future the irreplaceable, necessary, and corrective complement to what would otherwise be the incautious, too forgiving, and infantilizing universal compassion that too easily masquerades and demands recognition as moral virtue itself. Conservatives can rightly insist.
Don't release black criminals after they go on killing sprees. That's what he's saying,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
No, that's what he's saying.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, sorry, Jordan, they will not agree with you on this. They've already framed it that the criminal is merely the victim of society. And until you disprove this notion, like just stating it, asserting that that's not the case, is not persuasive to them.
Yeah, I mean, I sorry to bring up Carlyle again. I'm sure I've mentioned this hundreds of times, but my favorite essay of his is Model Prisons, where he's walking through these really like Victorian prisons and saying they're not harsh enough, and he's looking at the prisoners' faces, like ox face, dog face, and all that. He just has this extraordinary passage where he's just like, it's not punishment, it's not a disincentive, it's not like justice is not retribution, it's not rehabilitation. Justice is revenge. It's a revenge of good against evil. I just remember reading that and just thinking that is one of the most base things I've ever read. And
I got the same from Nietzsche, and I was sat there reading it thinking, he does have a great point.
and I just think that we're so far away from that kind of just no nonsense. Yeah, we must punish evil, basically.
Yeah, I don't care if you learn something from this. We're doing this because you deserve it. You earned it. You taking this terrible action incurred a moral penalty against society that will be paid out in your flesh. That's the Nietzschean sort of description.
And it's not like a utilitarian, this is a disincentive for other people to do crime, and it's not a kind of we're going to try to cure you, which is a Quaker, which is a kind of Quaker idea.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Don't worry, it'll be a nice side effect that other people will look at your hanging corpse and be like, I don't want that to be me. That'd be great, and that's why we used to string people up. But I totally agree with the pagan view of justice, to be honest.
It is this true and comprehensive justice, grounded in the irreplaceable traditions of our forebears, that has been and must continue to be both available and applied equally to all citizens, regardless of birth or circumstances. Tradition.
Okay, hang on. Yeah, I agree, right? But ask the British public, and you'll probably find 70% of them want to bring back the death penalty.
Yeah.
Right. So what now? He's got, again, a progressive mindset that he's trying to apply to what would otherwise be a very unprogressive set of solutions.
This is literally a defense of Britain of 1960s, or America of the 1950s, something like that. At most, But if you ask me, it's like this concept that he's talking about this is not strong enough to, like, this doesn't deserve to endure. It's just been too weak. This whole argument, it's not a strong enough tradition.
It's not even that it's not a strong enough tradition, right? It's that there's a demonstrable flaw in it, right? We've got to the point now where the Californians and the New Yorkers are literally releasing murderers after having served no time, and yet the January the 6th guys are in jail still, like nearly 2 years or whatever a year after the fact, or however long it's been. I just don't agree that this is justice. I don't agree that this is people getting what they deserve. The murderer should be hanged. Like, he should be swinging from the neck, and we should all get around like they used to in the Middle Ages and be like, oh, look, little Timmy, that's a murderer. And it's, oh, cool, good thing he's up there then, because he could have killed me. He could have, he deserves it for killing someone, for depriving someone of their life. That was intrinsically wrong. Like that is what a murderer deserves. But the progressives will have it that the murderer, he gets to go back on the street. And like this is what Anna Kasparian was struggling with the other day on the Young Turks, where she was like, this guy's been in jail like 40 times or something, and he's just let out again. How is this justice? I was like, exactly, Anna, exactly. Come over to the dark side. That's not justice, is it?
I know one person who agrees, Carl. This guy here. Look.
I know.
I regret having to release prisoners, Blair. There you
Tony
go.
Blair is no longer a Blairite. I told you earlier, he's not a Blairite anymore.
That was literally Blair when he was the Prime Minister. Said that in 2007.
Based, but that's 10 years on, right? 10 years into it, and he's just like, oh God, maybe I'm not a Blairite. It's like Marx saying I'm not a Marxist. It's like, well,
Look at that. He like more black people jailed in England proportionally than in the USA. That's how much jailing he did. So anyway,
Conservatives must state with courageous faith and confidence: the fundamental institutions of the West are solid, philosophically and practically. The idea that each individual is equal before the law and of divine intrinsic...
Okay, let's hash this out.
Well, I mean, our institutions aren't exactly solid right now. I mean,
I think what he means
was a weird thing to say at this particular moment inside, that our institutions are solid.
In principle, right? He's talking, I think, like from again, the sort of boomer perspective. So from his youth, they probably were solid, right? They probably were pretty good. And run by people who actually had to care for the institution rather than social justice or whatever. But they're captured now. But
they were even run better under Tony Blair, Carl.
Would you stop with your Tony Blair thing?
Sorry, but I mean, what I'm like, that was not that long ago. That was wasn't even 20. What was it? 2007 wasn't even 20 years ago.
Worth is inextricably associated with the presumption of the sovereign citizen, as well as the associated insistence that the stability of the state rests upon the careful and truthful judgment of that citizen. The idea that honest and untrammeled discourse among men and women of goodwill constitutes the eternal pathway to the truth that refreshes and redeems is a realization whose profundity of conceptualization and reliability in application is unparalleled in human history. The parliaments, congresses, and senates, where those of us in the West transform the inarticulate but reliable and trustworthy sentiments and desires of the people into the articulated body of laws we all abide by, are fundamentally good and functional, but require the wise trust and active engagement that conservatives would do well to embody.
This is like the anti-populist delusion right here.
Is there like any point in history where you could describe the American Congress as fundamentally good and functional? I mean, what is this? I don't even...
No, I agree with him on this.
Boo.
And promote.
No, hang on, right? This is exactly what the communists have been complaining about, and this is why cultural Marxism is a necessary thing for them to do. Our institutions are, if left to their own devices, actually pretty good at rooting out corruption, actually pretty good at fulfilling the function, even if that function is to slow everything down, and to put a check and balance on things. Like, they are actually quite good institutions when they're run with with well-intended people. The problem isn't actually the institutions themselves, it's the people manning them.
What, so you reckon, okay, let's just do a hypothetical. Replace every person in Congress and in the Senate, right, with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and like various copies of Marjorie Taylor Greene, right, male or female. Would it be functional then? You've replaced all the people.
What's the purpose of the Congress?
To legislate, I believe, is like, pass laws.
Yeah, but I mean, like, that's not the sum total of the purpose, right? The purpose is you could pass laws through fiat, through a king, right? There's a reason they don't have a king doing it, because there's more dimensions to the purpose of it.
Let me just put it a different way. Has adding more democracy to the UK in the form of the Welsh Assembly and the bloody Scottish Parliament increased the efficacy of the country or decreased it? Has it increased the corruption of the country or decreased it? Why is that? Every senator you've got, every politician, every congressman is a node of potential corruption and bribery, right?
Sure.
You're basically multiplying the total number of lobbyists and scumbags and swamp members every time you add another representative.
Sure, but I'm not arguing necessarily for democracy.
I want to
institutions, Parliament existed before democracy, right? But it was a useful enough body to give a form of representation and redress of grievances against the king. It's not a terrible institution when good faith is applied by all involved, right? It's not the same as it's not the Star Chamber,
Okay, all right. So let's just pretend, for the benefit of the doubt, the founding fathers' original vision, which was to have a Senate made up of non-voted people who prominent members of the community, factory owners, farm own, master blacksmiths, whoever, right? Yeah. They, like, by virtue of what they had done and being community leaders, they would, without a wage, as a favor to everybody else, take part in the Senate to help with the stewardship of the nation. That was the founding fathers' vision, right? If we had that, maybe I could start agreeing with you that the institution is not necessarily bad, but making it an elected chamber, or the old House of Lords, if we want to talk about Parliament, also had a kind of similar function. But as soon as you make it elected, you bring in all those problems I talk about in Popular Solution.
Yeah, but your problems are like very first world problems, right? Mm-hmm. Like, as general, these things are not terribly corrupt. Like, I would prefer any Western institution over any African institution.
Yeah, you would, but then we'd have to start going to, like, are the reasons for that because Liberia didn't quite get its constitution, which is an exact copy of the
goodwill of the people involved.
Marriage, not sexual satisfaction, is the most appropriate goal for love. Children and adults flourish in stable two-parent families. The broader community is best served by stable marriage and family. The needs of those in absolute poverty are best served by an uncorrupted and genuinely cooperative and competitive free market economy. The very real problem of inequality is best solved by a commendable combination of productivity and generosity within the framework that such structured systems provide. All of this nests within the overarching framework of the Abrahamic canon bequeathed to us by our forebears, and should be presented.
Just say Christian.
Well, Judeo-Christian.
Abrahamic, if you please.
It's Judeo-Christian, Charlemagne. Come on.
He's
a member of the Daily Wire. Goddammit.
And humility.
I don't want to get back into was Abraham a Christian debate again.
Well, it's pretty weird what he's saying right debate. Now. Isn't all this going against what he's saying about the individual? Like, what if the individual wants to pursue happiness in one of these like polyamorous coom-based relationships? I mean,
what if the individual's a Hindu?
Yeah,
as an inextricable part and parcel of that inheritance. Unity. A house divided against itself cannot stand. respect for individual sovereignty, appreciation for the intact family, responsible engagement in civic institutions, gratitude for the traditions that bind us and protect us from chaos, and courageous trust in the essential goodwill of others means unity in both appearance and reality. Conservatives at their best are characterized by profound appreciation for the necessity of such unity, apprehending it properly.
I'm sorry though, mate, but where are you going to get the... Did you see that Pakistani guy preaching down in Leicester? On what planet are you going to get goodwill from that guy?
Yeah.
Like, and he is part of the Abrahamic tradition, right? He's still not giving us goodwill.
Not really.
I mean, what has he proposed? Like, Jordan's going to sit him down and talk to him about the importance of responsibility and free markets, and suddenly this dude is going to, love Hindus or something.
Well, look, in a way, that actually Muslims would agree with all of that. Like, Muslims do think, they do have to take on personal responsibility, and Muslims have been famously entrepreneurial. Like, there's actually there's no problem there, right? There's no contradiction there.
Is it true that Peterson interviewed that exact Pakistani guy a few months ago?
I believe he cried during the interview.
That one who was preaching in Leicester? Surely not.
I believe so.
God,
I haven't watched it all myself, but he did interview him.
Jesus,
I've been told he cried during that interview.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Why? Okay, all right. I just want...
Moving on.
I didn't know that bit of Peterson law. Sorry, or the bit of the Pakistani guy in Leicester law, to be honest.
As the basis for the peaceful cooperation and competition that makes, and keeps us strong in the face of both adversity and enmity. Such unity also provides for the psychological and social predictability and structure that keeps the destabilizing terror of uncertainty at bay, as well as for the...
Sorry to interrupt this once more, but who is the audience for this? Because I can't imagine, like, who's that weasel who Sam Hyde said he was going to box?
Hassan Piker.
None of those guys are going to sit down and watch it.
And yet he's making appeals to capitalism in the face of communists going, capitalism's gay.
Right? But so, presumably everybody watching this is a potential kind of audience member for him, right? But this is like, has anybody watched this and been convinced by anything he said? Like, I just don't understand what he's trying to do here.
He's surely talking to leftists, because so much of this is framed around left-wing views, right? The left is ever present in this discussion that he's having. So, like, he's constantly making essentially jabs against them, right? And it's like, okay, great, but none of this is persuasive to the average leftist in any way, shape, or form. And I don't care, what a conservative manifesto, like, again, as I've been saying about conservatism at all, it's just essentially deifying the left. They're putting the left in the position of being in charge in all times, and I hate it.
But there's a guy in the chat said he's talking to 14-year-old boys, and that may be true. That may actually be true.
Shared communal purpose that provides the very framework for individual hope. The notion that no such unity is possible, or that it is always purchased through the use of self-interested power and compulsion, means only, in the first case, that disunity and the chaos that accompanies it is inevitable, and it
is. If it's a multi-ethnic society, it literally is. Unless, as we were talking about right at the start of the stream, Carl, unless you're prepared to use force and other such tactics to ensure that there is an order in that society. But if you kind of leave it to the voluntary associations and blah, blah, blah that you've been talking about, you end up with Leicester. That's just a fact.
I'm more concerned about the concept of certainty. We need to avoid uncertainty. It's like, there is no avoiding uncertainty at all, ever. Nothing is certain. Absolutely nothing. And normally, Peterson's message is the world is uncertain, so you need to be competent and strong and dangerous in order to cope with it. And therefore, you can feel confident wandering around the world, and you don't have to worry about the fact that it's uncertain, because whatever it is, you're a terrible, scary man, and you can deal with it. That's normally his position. But this craving for certainty is leftism personified. That's why they want everything to be like abstracted out into a realm where it never changes. right?
Mhm.
Like it's not where his mind should be. Like change is inevitable. The very like Oakeshott has got a great line on this, where he talks about, look, tradition is constantly changing. It's leftism and rationalism that is in search of something that can be fixed in eternity. You know, the year zero that's always true. Like tradition is not like that.
And the second, that a profound misunderstanding is in place regarding the causal relationship between true stability and productive peace, and the principles of free choice, voluntary association, reciprocal exchange, mature capacity to forestall gratification, and responsible action. The acceptance of these twin presumptions dooms their holder to a counterproductive and destabilizing anxiety and aimless hopelessness, and a consequent bitter cynicism, and with no conceptual or practical alternative to the personal wielding of arbitrary force. This is a recipe for personal doom and social catastrophe.
Yeah,
Conclusion.
they think they're going to be wielding the knife.
I'm also not convinced it's true. If it was a wise leader, he could use Schmittian decisionism for good ends as opposed to bad ends. I mean, I just don't know. In many ways, the nature of power is kind of the arbitrary. I mean, the guy who decides the exception, trying to decide what's best, all the time. Peterson seems to reject the very notion of people wielding power. Period. That it's all.
I'm sure that he would argue it's unaccountable power or something like that.
The blind and instrumental insistence that truth is an illusion and that nothing but power truly rules has left virtually everything of true and enduring use as a guide to purpose and a bulwark against despair abandoned on the wayside. The demoralized people of the West, and indeed in the rest of the world, are therefore crying out for the restoration of the abdicated values of individual sovereignty and responsible, genuine social service and purpose, whose acceptance and embodiment make our free societies possible, productive, admirable, generative, and stable. Conservatives who abide by the dictates of the eternal Western canon have the opportunity beckoning in front of them to once again make the case that the principles upon which we operate, the virtues in which we believe, and the freedom we have been divinely granted truly and eternally constitute the basis for the life more abundant which people of good faith desire and which we have every ability to establish and maintain.
This guy's just a boomer who's terrified of the future. I mean, this is like what Adam Curtis talks about in his documentaries. Is the ruling class is simply afraid of change, and they're obsessed with stability. They don't want anything to change because they don't know how to deal with the actual complexity of the modern world. They're literally terrified of it. He's terrified of it. He knows bad things are coming in the West, and he simply doesn't want to deal with it. He just wants to say, hey, please stop rocking the boat so we can go back to the 90s. Please stop, because I have no idea how to actually address the real problems people are having. And it's not utter sense.
But he's also arguing for change. He's saying we're demoralized, we're not prosperous, and we need to become moralized and prosperous. It's like, but that's a change.
You keep on saying the eternal canon of Western civilization. If St. Augustine or Aquinas or Seneca or Plato or any of these people read that, how much of it would they recognize? If fucking Shakespeare sat down and read it, how much would he? I don't recognize any part of what he's talking about as the quote unquote eternal Western canon.
Well, Ben Shapiro told him what it was.
It was just fucking it was just Randianism.
In many ways, I think that's correct, yes.
All right, folks. Well, anyway, we've caught up with Jordan Peterson, 10 years worth of research, and it's just kind of warmed up libertarianism at the end of the day. There are a ton of super chats. Carl, I know it's late for you. Do you want to?
Yeah, we'll go through some.
You want to stick around for them? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Narco Republican says, last week I learned that Abraham was the first Christian, Jesus the first Muslim, And William of Orange, the first American patriot. Thanks for all this knowledge, AA. Yeah, I will say I asked my vicar about this, and he kind of said Abraham was a Christian. It's not as wacky as I
Is
thought.
your vicar a woman?
No, it's a bloke. Yeah, he's a bloke. Yeah, nice guy. Narco Republican says the only manifesto I would support is the Manifesto Against the Death of the Spirit and the Earth by Javier Ruiz Botilla, co-signed by Alavo Mutis. It's really good. Look it up. Here's the Eunuch says Peterson's manifesto just sounds like what he wants to shout into the face of every academic and leftoid who shunned him. This was delivered with the gusto of a jilted wife who found out her man has been cheating on her for years, who then prepared a scathing final speech for her soon-to-be ex-husband. Strong femoid energy from Peterson. Such a shame, bucko.
Yeah, it's a gamma male speech. This is why Vox Day calls him a gamma.
That's totally true. Like this is what he wants to say to those leftist academics.
I just thought the delivery was very poor, and I've seen Peterson speak before, but the delivery was woeful. He was much better at the start, Carl, like you said, when he was grandfatherly. And Glow in the Dark says problem is much of what is traditional and is instinctual in a lot of ways. It was developed in the field, not the university, so no formal written thing other than maybe the Bible. Enlightenment thinkers looked at the foundation and superstructure of the West as artificial, which on a macro level it was to an extent, but not much thought went into it, so society was more organic than they would admit. Then they replaced the foundation and the pillars. Slow it started collapsing in, structure held, but decaying. What did you need to do to create kingdom on a royal line? Firstly, land, then one man, and the people that follow him. How much study went into that? People follow leaders instinctively. Back in the olden days, bad leaders were abandoned or killed. You know, there is a baseline for humanity which is very illiberal. We share the same general form, but what fills out that form makes us different. It's only when we interact with each other and the world that we gain tradition, which probably gets ingrained on a genetic level after a few generations. Once society collapses, this is a whole essay, by the way.
That's just demonstrably not true. Like I watched the Zoomers, like again Callum and like all the young guys. Like it's not ingrained on a genetic level. It's cultural. It's very obviously cultural, and it can definitely be interrupted.
He continues. Once society collapses, the baseline of humanity will re-emerge. As we figure out what works, new traditions will emerge, which will probably be similar to the old ones. For all factors that oppress us from nature is the same, but the people are not. I don't know. If you dropped Callum in the middle of, if you dropped Callum and a few other random British people in the middle of Africa, I think they would have Zoomers now. I think they would have an easier time of forming a queue than the locals.
Callum would just go native, I think.
Glow in the Dark says, well, I've seen Callum queue. He's all right queuing.
Yeah, of course, he's capable of queuing. Obviously, he's British, but like, I think he would go native if dropped in Africa.
Glow in the Dark says, we've seen him as a Taliban. Now we need to say him as a kind of Congolese militia or something like that.
I'm up for seeing it. But again, what he should be, is like, a beefeater in the fucking parade, right?
Glow in the Dark says we need to reframe the views. What is the opposite of chaos? It is stagnation. Where is order or society? Somewhere in the middle of duty and liberty, or between responsibility and choice. He also says China is not innovative at all. It took them until 2012 to be able to build ball bearings small enough for ballpoint pens. They did invent writing, though. They did invent writing. I'll just put that out there. And they were only able to do that with used equipment from the West. Sorry, they didn't invent writing. They invented ink. Not writing, but
they probably already had ink.
Jacob says, what is this character arc from AA where we praise Blair and decry free trade? Where's my popcorn? This is amazing.
It's a great question, though. How's it come to this, AA?
I don't know. I've stared into the abyss so long. It's stared right back at me and seduced by Saruman. Glow in the Dark says, Peterson is wrong about truth. Truth is eternal and unchanging. Your perception of it may change, but not the truth. Peterson is selling the left's or the establishment's view on truth. 1,000 wrong answers are not the right answer, but if each wrong answer is found out, it eliminates a bad answer. Central Academic Agency says, hey, Sargon, the less fat and liberal you are, the cooler you are. It correlates, as Dutton would say, keck.
Well, I appreciate the compliment, I suppose.
Rogue Crusader says, always good to see Don Carlos. He is a welcome guest in my eye. Also, tell Louis to do a stream or I'll dox his whole family. Glow in the dark. Merit can be how well you make friends or make a connection, because if you have connections, you can get help from other sources, which is a merit in and of itself. It was people's and leaders' dedication to society, themselves, each other, and the desire for truth, not science, that brought about prosperity of the West. Central Academic Agency says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of sovereign citizenshipness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules for Life, 5:10. Glow in the Dark says, I don't know if Peterson thought this out entirely. It sounds like a bunch of old conservative talking points, boomerisms, and his own views, not well explained or articulated, like he is on the edge of something, but isn't jumping into it directly. Yeah, I agree with that. Years the Eunuch says,
No, he thought about it for 10 years and then happened to arrive at a regurgitated Daily Wire piece.
It's weird, that, isn't it? Yeah.
So I've thought about this for 10 years, and it's Judeo-Christian values, guys.
Ben Shapiro co-wrote it or something. Years the Eunuch says,
he definitely had a hand in it.
I can't believe what a long-winded, pedantic, self-aggrandizing disaster the presentation was. It was like a room. He is, I can't read this out. It was like a room full of a certain people, high on their own farts, wrote and directed this manifesto. # Daily Wire. Yes.
And that was only part 1. There's more of this.
Oh, I'm not doing part 2. Fuck that.
Well, part 2 might be better.
Yeah.
I was going to say that actually. This is like him setting the stage, so maybe it'll get better.
Glow in the Dark says resources are technically infinite. Whether we can get to it or if they are in a form we can use is another matter. We have not destroyed any matter on Earth, but changed it into a form we can't yet use as of yet.
A BTFO'd.
What happens to coal after you burn it then?
Yeah, that's just wrong. I mean, there's infinite resources there's not infinite resources on the Earth. I mean, by best cosmology, there's not even infinite resources in the entire cosmos. I mean, you could say it's effectively infinite, but you can't actually say it's infinite.
No, the Dark says justice is what must be done or should not be done. Years the Eunuch says, when Carl says the institutions were good before the corruption, he means when we were properly ethnically white, British, and weren't taken over by years. How long have you been on YouTube? You're not allowed to say these things. I cannot read this sentence out. We weren't taken over by various other ethnic groups, let's just say. Glow in the Dark says...
Don't say anything. I don't know what you're talking about.
Glow in the Dark says...
I'm completely oblivious.
Glow in the Dark says, if you kill the criminal, he will be totally reformed and will never commit another crime.
Good point.
How much Kabbalah magic did Ben Shapiro use on Peterson to get him to be in a cognitive maze that he is in now? He does seem lost. I will agree, basically. And I actually came into this with actually like really charitable intentions, but this was just way worse than I thought it was going to be honest.
What I find strange is that Peterson isn't engaging actual philosophers, as far as I can tell. And it's like that, because I mean, like, any philosopher would have turned around and gone like, okay, a lot of these words are basically synonyms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, you need to get this at least a bit more coherent and, choose words that are more sharply defined from one another.
Avalok says his vision is sterile, no magic. Dead Melted Face says, very excited to see you two inspiring men review another great man. Despite our differences, you guys and Dr. Peterson are building a generation of strong men. Thank you for all your work.
No, I do feel the need to defend Peterson somewhat, because he's not a bad guy, and he is, I think, operating in good faith. I just think he's slightly beyond his remit on this, and it's not that he can't do good or anything, or anything like that. It's just that he's approaching this in the wrong way. And frankly, I just felt that none of it was conservative. It was all
I did as well.
libertarian rationalism.
And not even Mises, like Rand. Yeah. Emil Cadabel says, I feel like Peterson is getting more impatient with the corruption of the elites. Do you think it's possible to lure him fully on board to our side?
No, I think he's just terrified of the future.
I get the impression that he has done zero research or reading, like none.
Well,
Peterson.
Yeah, not in his life. I mean, in terms of political theory, in terms of the conservative tradition, in terms of all of us watching this have been on an intellectual journey over the past few years. Didn't take 10 years. It took past 4 or 5 years we've been on this intellectual journey. But we've done that by actually reading stuff and by figuring out, like, well, we agree with this, we disagree with that, recognizing aspects of the world as it is. Now, I just get the impression that Peterson is just resting on like liberal priors, basically, and hasn't updated them one iota.
I don't know why he wouldn't cite Scruton or Burke. Like the if you're going to talk about tradition, that should be your tradition in the English speaking world. That's where you go, right?
Yeah, he didn't even quote Burke.
Yeah, like Burke's like the exact right place to begin, because Burke's a Whig as well. So I just don't understand what. Yeah, I think you're right.
Felix Calamitous says none of this would have happened if Zoe Quinn hadn't Five Guys burgers and fries.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Man, I don't get that. I don't get that.
Wouldn't have to have saved the West if she wasn't a whore.
Mandara says, remember your QT Lotus Eaters asking Carl not to fall into the based Blair trap. P.S. I know how ironic.
Callum is not down with the bass Blair thing.
Well, lots of D's not down with it. Lots of people aren't down with it. But,
well, it's because it's not true.
I don't know. It's all relative, right? It's relative. To Liz Truss, Blair is more based.
Yes, probably, but that's not saying a lot.
Why have cotton when you can have silk? Why have the why have the ersatz version when you can have the real thing? He's right
Tony
there.
Blair is a satisfying pair of warm silk pajamas to you, is he?
No, he's the real thing, is what I'm saying.
Like Dee said, you're going to vote for him a third time.
If we're going to be ruled over by soulless, technocratic, managerial elites, you might as well have the best in the business, not like the people we've got now.
Purely for aesthetic reasons.
P.S. There is a Russian Twitch account streaming wasting gas as a taunt.
Streaming what?
It's a Russian Twitch account. He's just wasting gas as a taunt to the West.
Oh, dick!
It's like he's got all his like cooker on, and
yeah.
Red Pilling has just sent £1. E-Bill Cadabal, you really need to reach out to Will Noland and join forces with him. He is very smart and traditionalist, and he seems a natural fit on our side. Yeah, okay. I will reach out to Nolan on one condition: that he stops posting YouTube shorts. Return to tradition. Tradition is not YouTube shorts.
I just published an article by him the other day.
Maybe
check the website.
Carl, are Lotus Eaters going to produce TikTok-style content on YouTube shorts?
Well, I think we do.
What? Do you?
Well, I don't know. I'm not in charge of the social media, but yeah, I think we do.
Monothalmus.
You got to be everywhere, mate. We've got to talk to the Zoomers, isn't it?
Monothalmus says, "What can I say in a minute?" Anyway,
well, usually it's just like funny outtakes and stuff, right?
Oh, I see, right.
Where someone like flubs a word or something, and Josh is just like, "Oh yeah, good point, go on." It's just funny clips like that.
I see. I might innovate. I might just do minute long where I just chant my slogans. We live in the ashes of civilization. Just repeat it 10 times in a row.
Yeah. Why not?
There's no way you're going to do that.
No. Monothalmus says conservatism is understanding timeless truths. The good news on a long enough time scale, it always will triumph. Bad news, that may take 100 years. I don't share optimism, actually. I look at the long view of history and do not see that it will always triumph. In fact, I see quite the opposite.
I think conservatism is merely the tail end of the left.
Red Hawk says, I like Jordan, but he has a major blind spot with intersexual dynamics. His daughter being a hoe and leaving her husband and child to chill with Andrew Tate should tell you something.
Well, I don't know what's going on in their personal life, so I don't really want to.
Lavish says, I don't know any. I don't know any Jordan Peterson lore at all, I'm afraid.
No.
Lavish says, my Afghan parents missed British colonialists. Yeah, I'm sure they did.
Who doesn't?
Lavish also says, North Italians, like Lombards, are efficient. They don't have Arab mix in them like the Southerners, which explains the delays and their slow nature. I've just got flashbacks to True Romance, the Christopher Walken character, and Dennis Hopper, you know. Belfast Knight says, if Peterson is the model of a conservative Canadian, the US may have to annex Canada for its own good, or it can accept Canadian refugees. Mandarus, many Canadians are quite conservative, hard-working chaps, you know. Believe it. This is one of those things.
Yeah.
The idea we have of Canada as a super liberal place isn't quite true.
No, it's just informed by the cities, isn't it?
Mandarus says, we need to wed tradition and technocracy. Machiavelli Sucks to Go says, AA, you gave us your problems first. Take some accountability. Quit blaming everything on America. There weren't no Lizzos twerking in the British Empire, mate. Dr. Ron Paul says, I agree with the premise that current labour and trade conditions are not optimal. Can we please stop saying this is a result of free trade? Current iterations are carefully constructed with the intention of gutting industry through tariffs and quotas.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I would agree that what we have at the moment is managerialism, not like the laissez-faire free market. But it's still a fact that we trade freely with China, and it has gutted our industries.
Yeah, but this is down to neoliberalism. It's literally down to Reagan and Thatcher.
Yes.
Our
I agree.
countries are merely things to be sold to foreigners. This has got to stop.
Yeah, and not just our countries, but our resources, our heritage. Yeah, everything's for sale. Lady of Shot says, Peterson brought the work of Solzhenitsyn to a new audience. For that, I am grateful. I love Solzhenitsyn. Would you consider a cigar stream on him, AA? Yeah, why not? Red Pill UK says, I have money. Thank you. Scotchy McDumpwaffle says, objective morality requires a deity. Set the objective, otherwise we devolve into egotism or utilitarianism. There is no truth in morality otherwise.
There's no such thing as objective morality.
The Enriab says, old man shouts at clouds. It was a bit like that at times as well. Luke Slade, I have to say the optics on it were really bad. And I liked his suit too, and his look, but it's the delivery.
He should have talked normally. Should have just talked normally.
Merit!
Aaron says, Peterson really doesn't understand the fact that in order for conservatism to succeed, it must contain some revanchism. Jared Uran says, hey, Carl, what happened to Louis Laval? Did he finally get caught in a Chinese honey trap?
I guess he must have done. I don't know. I would love for him to stream more often as well.
Audra Noel Zenterim says, he literally talked to Dan Crenshaw before this. Is that the guy with the eye patch?
God.
I've got to say, him joining the Daily Wire was not my favourite thing that he's done. I don't even dislike the Daily Wire either. It's just, it feels less authentic.
The Enriab says, Blair says what he needs you to hear to beguile and seduce you. Will to power. His words do not match his actions. He deserves a different master.
Yes, don't trust him, AA. Don't vote for him again.
Blanca said, Peterson has become like Freud. Any knowledge he brought is accepted as given. Now the only thing that's left is boomer truth with nothing else to say. Spire says, bring back coverture law. This needs to be a serious discussion on the right. White Raven says, a conservative was killed for his views in North Dakota. A man ran him over with his car and finally admitted to it in court today, speaking about his family like they were somehow in danger. The Enriab says...
He was only 18 as well. He was a 41-year-old. I mean, this is literally what you could call stochastic terrorism.
Yes. The Enriab says, the Blair-Putin AA love triangle. Yeah, did you see that? Blair back in 2014 saying, let's forget about Ukraine.
Putin to defeat the Islamists.
Glow in the Dark says, I think Peterson is being lazy and is becoming the right version of Neil deGrasse Tyson. I doubt he will change with Shapiro whispering in his ear like a black tongue. Israel is good, right, AA? I love the nation of Israel, don't you forget it. Jason Viendenhall says, Dearest Agent Parcheesi, do you have a plan on doing a deeper law on Shakespeare? With love, Dr. Vendenhall. I'm not sure about deepest law. I may do a course on Shakespeare if I get the time, but given I have a book to write by December, it won't be until next year at the very earliest.
Oh my God. Apparently Facebook is allowing me to set up paid subscriptions to my personal page. I'm like, really? I've been like, if you want to go and like my Facebook page, it tells you, by the way, this thing often shares stuff that's not approved by the regime. Are you sure? You've got to actually click yes, okay, like twice, and they're like, hey, do you want to monetize that? It's like, yeah, you're right. Fuck off.
Go and,
How the fuck are you going to let me monetize this?
Go and give Carl shekels on Facebook until he's inevitably shut down by Zuckerberg in a year or something.
This is a trap of some sort, isn't it? Motherfuckers.
Glow in the Dark says, sorry, it was worm tongue. I messed up the reference.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of late super chats. Is conservatism Alexander Duginism? No, and as I've said many times, that may work for Russians. It's never going to work for us. Glow in the Dark says, do you think the Britisher would defend Lizzo twerks while she crushes him with it so she can show her dominance over the white man, a black tradition? I don't know what Britisher would say about Lizzo. I don't know what Britisher would say. You'd have to ask him yourself.
Surely he'd be in favour.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Now get out.
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!